Our story begins with a man who is getting beaten up while training, and he fears that he will not survive. A group of adventurers are glad to see that he has improved over the past couple of years, and they determine that the upcoming E rank test won't be a problem for him. A while later, entrance for the E rank promotion test is registered. Our protagonist Rick is one of them, and the receptionist named Alicia is happy to see him again. It's been 2 years since they last saw each other, and it was when Rick used to be a guild clerk. Alicia was surprised to hear that Rick became an adventurer, and Rick can't blame her because starting as an adventurer at age 30 is pretty unimaginable. Normally people start as F-rank apprentices when they are teenagers and become A-ranked just 2 years after that. Alicia wonders where Rick has been, so Rick explains that he was up in the mountains, training with some senior adventurers. Then some drunk guy tries to make an advance towards Alicia, but Rick calms him down. Everyone's attention turns to them when the guy passes out, so Rick reminds everyone to drink responsibly. Alicia gives him his exam ticket and wishes Rick luck on the E-rank exam. Rick is horrified when his ticket has a really unlucky number of 4242. Outside, Rick tells some woman named Rionette that he finished registering, and Rionette reminds him where his eyes are. Back inside, everyone is shocked to see an imprint of Rick's hand on the drunk guy's armor because it is made of steel. What's even more shocking is that the drunk guy is an infamous former A-rank adventurer. His name is Domold the Fiendish Knight, and Domold is a wanted criminal. Then Alicia is shocked when she wonders if Rick has become strong enough to easily leave an imprint in steel armor. A while later, Rick's height is measured, and the examiners are shocked to see that Rick is 32 years old. After that, participants have their magical energy tested by putting their hands on a crystal ball. One guy gets D-, and one girl gets a C+. Rick's turn is next, but the light Rick generates from the crystal is very low, so Rick is given an F-. The others have never seen a score so low, so they hope they never end up like Rick. Rick leaves, but the examiner is shocked when the crystal ball breaks. In the next exam, participants have to attack something to measure the force they can generate. The device can absorb insanely powerful attacks, so participants are told not to hold back. This device is a slime bag, and in the past, someone taught Rick about it too. Rick was told that the human body is the foundation of a good fighter, regardless of what weapons or magic they have. Rick was instructed to destroy the golden slime bag with his bare hands, because once Rick could do that, he would have a body that he could trust. However, this golden slime bag is known for being as strong as dragon's teeth. Rick was sure that he wouldn't be able to destroy it with his bare hands, but Rick was told that doing so is a simple task for an adventurer. Rick's instructor revealed that he could destroy 200 at once and demonstrated a bit of his power. Rick had to work his way up by hitting the bag with 50,000 punches every single day. Back to the present, one guy impresses everyone when he attacks a bag using strengthening magic. Some little guy is up next, and he declares that the time to show off his strength has finally come. This kid is the second son of the Duke, and rumors say that even though he is just 11 years old, he has magic equivalent to a C rank. Then this child prodigy shocks everyone when he prepares his attack. His setup is truly a flashy display, but everyone is shocked when the attack turns out to be a tiny fireball. Everyone is still impressed by the damage it does, and they call him a genius. Rick is amazed as well, because the kid used level 3 nature-composed blaze magic. Another look back at Rick's training some little girl, using an insanely powerful fire attack on him. Both attacks were blaze attacks, but they looked really different, so Rick wonders if the kid compressed his for indoor use. Soon it was Rick's turn, but the examiner didn't expect much from him. If magic isn't trained at a young age, then the chances for growth later in life are impossible. On top of that, Rick's results from the magic test were pitiful, so the examiner recommends that Rick just give up now. Rick actually agrees with everything the examiner says, but Rick can't help but think back to his training. Rick was exhausted from punching the bag one day, but Rick refused to give up. Rick acknowledges that he started his journey really late, but Rick believes that his age shouldn't matter. Because of this, Rick strikes the bag and shocks everyone when Rick absolutely destroys it with a single punch. Rick doesn't even know his own strength though, as Rick wonders if the bag was just defective. Everyone watches in terror as they wonder who Rick is. The kid is furious at Rick for stealing his attention, but the kid plans to show off during the defensive ability test. A moment later, we see that everyone is shocked again when Rick defends against level 4 nature-composed magic, something the kid couldn't even do. The examiner is surprised to hear that Rick only used level 1 magic to block the attack, so examiner decides to go one level up for the next one. The examiner will use level 5 attack magic, so the examiner suggests that Rick should use something higher than level 1 defense magic. Then Rick shocks everyone yet again, when Rick reveals that he can only use level 1 magic of offense and defense. Rick assures the examiner that he will be okay. So the examiner gets offended, as he believes that Rick is underestimating him. The examiner decides not to hold back, and starts his incantation. Examiner unleashes the level 5 attack, shocking everyone with its immense power, and even some might worry about it from really far away. His name is Sylvester, and Sylvester rushes to the arena because he couldn't believe such a powerful attack would be used during an exam. Then Sylvester is informed about Rick, and how Rick was able to block a level 5 attack with just level 1 defense magic. Sylvester assumes it must be some kind of joke, but he is told that it isn't. It's just an impressive 32-year-old F-rank adventure. Rick's report reveals that he was a guild receptionist for 14 years. Sylvester doesn't seem to know where receptionist is, and Rick's power makes him wonder if it is a title given to someone who has defeated a dragon. After the written exam, Rick expresses how confident he is that he aced it. Just then the kid named Freed angrily approaches Rick. Rick barely remembers Freed, so Rick assumes that he is lost and offers to help him to find his parents. Freed is furious and says that Rick took all the attention away from him. Just then Freed's older sister Angelica arrives and is upset that Rick made her brother cry. Freed says that the 40-year-old man ruined everything, but Rick angrily corrects him by saying that he is only in his 30s. Angelica only believes her brother and challenges the 40-year-old man to a duel. Rick points out that she will get her glove dirty, but Rionette explains that picking up the glove means Rick has accepted the duel. A moment later the two arrive in the arena, and Angelica declares that she must punish the old man. Duels in the kingdom allow each participant to propose one condition for the duel. Angelica proposes that the loser must act as the victor's servant until the end of their life, and her brother cheers her on. Angelica is a second-class knight, and Rick is shocked to hear that this means she is on the same level as a B-rank adventurer. B-rank adventurers are powerful enough to defeat monsters on their own, but Rionette still tells Rick to take it easy on her. Rick thinks Rionette has it all wrong and points out that he is just an F-rank adventurer who just registered a couple of days ago. Rick fears that he won't make it out of the duel alive, so Rionette tells him to just remember his training from the past 2 years. Rick begins to be inspired by the training montage that plays in his head, but Rick remembers how terrible it is, and it just makes him puke. Rionette tells him to be more confident, and reminds him of the group that trained him. The group called Orichalcon Fist prides itself on being the strongest in the continent, and they consider Rick to be one of its members. Rick thanks Rionette for restoring his confidence, and steps up to Angelica. Angelica knows that Rick is an F rank, so Angelica promises to refrain from ending his life. Angelica prepares for the fight, and Rick can tell that she is a swordswoman who strengthens her body and weapons. Angelica wonders if Rick will be able to keep up with her speed, and Rick is shocked when she flies right by him. Angelica explains that she slowed down just a bit for Rick, and Angelica wonders if Rick is not talking because of how shocked he is. The little Freed laughs at the 40-year-old and says that people call his sister the Lightspeed because of how fast she is. Angelica declares that she will actually attack him this time without holding back, and Angelica uses her incredibly fast attack again. Rick goes quiet again, but we see that it's actually because Rick sees how slowly Angelica moving. Angelica is even slower than when Rick walks, so Rick wonders why anyone would call her the Lightspeed. Rick easily dodges her attack, but Angelica thinks Rick just got lucky because only a handful of first-class knights are able to properly react to her speed. Angelica is sure that Rick won't be able to dodge it a second time, but Rick is once again unimpressed by how slow she is moving. Rick can't believe that Angelica is a knight, and wonders if Angelica became one through nepotism. Rick considers for a moment that he might actually be really strong, but then Rick laughs at the thought. Rick prepares to dodge the attack again, but Angelica trips and starts rolling towards him. Rick just barely manages to dodge her out-of-control attack, but Rick is oblivious. Rick couldn't read her movements at all, and assumed that it was an incredible skill of hers. This little incident makes him remember that he is just an F rank, and there is a huge gap in skill between him and a second-class knight. Angelica knows that she actually tripped, but decides to pretend like the attack was on purpose. Angelica declares that she will attack again, but move even faster this time. Angelica's next attack takes a great toll on her body, so she can only use it 3 times. Angelica uses the attack that's supposed to be way faster, but it is still pretty slow in Rick's eyes. The clueless Rick fears that Angelica might use another terrifying rolling attack again if he makes the wrong move, so Rick dodges carefully. Angelica is shocked and wonders what she should do, because she can only use the attack 2 more times. Angelica decides to use her last 2 attacks in succession, and Rick realizes that he needs to fight back. Just then Angelica trips again on her last attempt. Rick thinks it is another terrifying technique, and fears that his attack won't land in time. Dust goes everywhere, and everyone watches in shock. When the dust clears, we see that Rick's attack created a crater in the ground. Angelica is horrified, as she realizes that if she didn't trip, then Rick's terrifyingly powerful attack would have landed on her. The clueless Rick thinks that Angelica purposely dodged it, and Angelica wonders who this guy is. Rick explains that he is just an F-rank adventurer that used to be a guild receptionist 2 years ago. Rick isn't sure he can do much against a second-class knight, but he will do his best during their duel, and use it as a learning experience. Rick excitedly prepares to continue their fight, but Rick is shocked when Angelica just surrenders. Fried is shocked as well, and Angelica says that she will let him win this time. Angelica tries to get out of there as quickly as possible, but Rick reminds her about the duel conditions. Rick didn't actually propose anything, but he is fine with using hers. Angelica doesn't want to serve him for the rest of her life, so Angelica asks her legs to exceed their limits just one more time and runs away. Rick doesn't really consider it a victory, but Rionette reminds them that it's time for the results of the preliminary test. Just then Rick is shocked when Rionette reveals that the other members of the group will be arriving soon. The terrified Rick wonders why they're coming, so Rionette explains that they want to see how Rick is doing. Rick has a really bad feeling about it, but it is too late as we see that the others are on their way. Then we learn about a hero who attempted to defeat the ultimate monster called Kaiser. Doing so would have rewarded him a treasure that can grant any wish. This hero failed to defeat the monster, but he had faith that an adventurer would one day be able to do it. Back with Rick, all participants are told that they will receive the test results soon. Mana will be sent to their exam tickets, and if it glows blue then they pass. Participants that pass will then participate in a mock battle for the second stage of the exam. Rionette tells the worried Rick to be more confident, and her kindness makes him wish he were 10 years younger, so they could date. Rionette isn't worried about the results, because if Rick fails then she decides that they will just triple Rick's training. Rick is sure that he won't survive more training like that, but he doesn't have to worry about that, as his card glows blue. Rick is glad to have passed the exam, but his attention turns when Rick smells something terrible. Just then a noble named Raster introduces himself, and he compliments Rionette's beauty. Rick tries to introduce himself to his fellow exam taker, but Raster declares that he has no business with a middle-aged man like Rick. Raster says that he dropped something, but this just turns out to be a pickup line. Raster says that he dropped his feelings of love deep inside Rionette's eyes. Raster would like to make her his wife, but Rick intervenes and declares that Rionette is his girlfriend. Raster mocks Rick for being an F rank in his middle age, but Rick points out that Raster looks like he is at least 25. Raster calls him an idiot, as Raster reveals that he became an E rank at 14 years old. He is now an A rank, and will be one of the examiners for the second stage of the exam. Raster tells Rionette to ditch the loser, but everyone is shocked when Rionette refuses Raster's offer and says that she is dating Rick. Then Rionette embarrasses Raster when she points out that his perfume is unpleasant, and Rick realizes that this guy is what smells. Raster becomes enraged and tells Rick that he better hope that he isn't his examiner for the test. Rick apologizes to Rionette for saying she was his girlfriend, but Rionette surprisingly doesn't mind. Rionette was actually happy that Rick got her out of that creepy situation. Raster, on the other hand, has come to hate Rick, and Raster vows to put him in his place. Just then we learn that Fried and Angelica are his younger siblings, and they complain to him about some old guy bullying them. This of course makes him more upset, and Raster promises to never forgive the old guy, which makes his family cry. His siblings tell him Rick's exam number, and Raster comes up with a devious plan. The next day Rionette reminds Rick to hold back his strength in the mock battle, but Rick has no clue why Rionette would say that. Just then some guy named Lynx explains that he will be in charge of Rick's test in the second stage. Rick is glad that his examiner isn't Raster, and Lynx thinks it's strange that a clerk in his 30s would decide to become an adventurer. Rick assumes that the guy is looking down on him, but Lynx is actually amazed by his determination. Lynx is a fellow middle-aged man, and Rick has inspired him. Lynx can tell that Rick has a goal that is motivating him, and Rick can't believe that Lynx knows so much. Lynx explains that it's because the two of them are very similar. Lynx became an adventurer at 25, and he is now in his 40s. It has taken him 20 years to reach a B rank, but his goal is to become an A rank. Rick can tell that Lynx won't give up on his dreams just like him, so Lynx looks forward to having a test with him. The two get along really well, as they even plan to get a drink after the exam, but we see that Raster is listening. After Lynx leaves, Lynx thinks about how he can tell how much Rick has trained, just from his handshake. This inspires Lynx to train harder, but Lynx is shocked when Raster appears and says that he wants to talk. Back with Rick, Rionette can tell that Rick is in a really good mood, but participants in Rick's group are told that Lynx has fallen ill. Rick doesn't recognize the name when they're told that the replacement will be Raster, but Rick is shocked when Rionette explains that Raster was the perfume guy from the day before. Rionette points out that Raster is probably related to the nobles Rick met earlier, and everyone else in the group laments having Raster be their examiner. They are all terrified of him, as Raster is known as the man of 1,000 spells. Raster has a more infamous nickname as well, which is the F-Rank Crusher. Raster is called this because he torments participants that have gotten his attention. Rick is terrified to hear this, because Rick did a lot more than just get Raster's attention. Elsewhere, Raster shows his immense power, as he eliminates one of his own elite guards. Rick worries because he antagonized the guy who knows 1,000 spells. Rick considers himself to just be an F rank, who only knows first nature magic, so Rick wishes he could just go home. Going home would result in his training getting tripled though, so Rick realizes that he is a dead man no matter what he does. Rick has lost all his confidence because people keep mocking him for his age, but Rionette believes that Rick can do it. Instead of losing confidence, Rick can gain confidence when others insult him. Rick is unsure, but Rionette knows that Rick is strong, and Rionette is confident that Rick will beat Raster and pass the exam. Rionette has believed in Rick since the day he decided to become an adventurer, so Rick's confidence is restored. Just then a stranger calls him a young man, and this person can tell that Rick is struggling with something. He compliments Rick's youth, and offers to do some fortune-telling for him. Rick isn't so sure about it at first, but the guy offers to do the first one for free. Rick can't resist, so he goes to take a seat, but Rionette notices a magic circle on the chair. Rick disappears and the stranger reveals that he is actually Freed, and Freed declares that he is a great actor. Rionette demands to know where he teleported Rick, but Freed refuses to say anything. The furious Rionette demonstrates her terrifying power when she slices off all of Freed's eyelashes with just the slightest movement. Rionette terrifies Freed by declaring that she will take one of his eyes next and even lets him choose which eye he will lose. Freed is absolutely horrified and reveals that he can teleport objects only 100 meters away, so Rick should be close by. Nearby, Rick finds himself outside the venue, and Rick is confronted by a large group of serious-looking guys. Some butler explains that they are the elite guards of the Diarmid family, and they need Rick to sleep for a while. Rick realizes that it's the noble family that just keeps bothering him, and the guards explain that they have to make it, so Rick can't participate in the exam. Rick can't believe that they are resorting to dirty tricks like stalling him, but the butler points out that they aren't stalling him, they are ganging up on him. The butler reveals that their powers are equivalent to B and A ranks, so Rick realizes that there is no way he can win. Just then a group appears, and Rick is terrified to see that it's the senior members of his party. They wonder why Rick is outside when he should be taking the exam, and the guards are shocked to see that the big guy looks like a talking orc. The guards confront the orc, but for some reason Rick lies, and says that this group is helping him to warm up before the exam. The orc says that he will help out as well, but Rick just gets worried, and pleads to the butler to have his men back off for their own good. Rick explains that their lives are in danger, but the butler ignores him, and tells his men to eliminate everyone. Guard tries attacking the orc, but everyone is shocked when his sword shatters on the orc's head, which doesn't even move an inch. The orc compliments the guard for strengthening his body, but points out that he needs to do a better job, like strengthening his weapons too. The guard tries to punch the orc, but orc is easily stopped, and his hand is shattered in the process. The orc surprisingly heals him, and even gives him advice on how to stay more balanced during a fight. The blonde guy in Rick's group can tell that Rick is in trouble like always, and decides that he will have to resolve the issue peacefully. This guy's definition of peace is pretty messed up though, as he pulls out a giant gun, and explains that it is his newest invention. This thing is a crazy weapon, as it fires magic-infused crystals. The guards try to attack him, but they just end up beaten by the blonde guy's weapon. Rick tells him to stop, so the blonde guy assumes that Rick wants to try the weapon himself, but Rick is just worried that blonde guy might end their lives. Just then one of the guards comes up with the brilliant idea to take the little girl from Rick's group hostage. Guard threatens to take her life, but Rick gets horrified and wonders if the guard has some kind of death wish. Even the orc tells him to let her go for his own good. The little girl wonders what the guard is doing, so Rick tries to keep her calm and tells her that he just wants to play a game. The girl believes him and wonders what kind of game guard wants to play, but the guard foolishly decides to make his intentions clear. Guard hits her, so she becomes furious, and Rick can tell that they are done for. She absolutely decimates the fools, and the rest of the guards are shocked, because she unleashes 7th nature level magic, without an incantation. The butler now knows exactly who this little girl is, and reveals that she is the famous vampire mage. She is the strongest mage at only 10 years old, and she is known as the Demon Child of Ruin. Kitaerarete is her name, and Kitaerarete isn't the only famous person in the group. The blonde guy is a half-elf half-dwarf, who is more than 50 years old. He is the world's best weapons craftsman, and many think he somehow has technology from 1,000 years in the future. His name is Mizet. As for the orc, he has great intelligence and superhuman strength. He is also a master of support magic, and his name is Brufston. Then guards are stunned to hear that they all are S ranks, and members of the S rank only party, known as Orihalkan Fists. The butler never thought he would live long enough to witness them with his own eyes, but now he has decided to retire. Butler plans to live the rest of his life in peace, and the guards have never seen the old man so tranquil. Then Kitaerarete has some fun destroying everyone with her one-word spells, and Rick decides that he doesn't want to train under these crazy people again, so Rick promises to do his best to pass the exam. Back at the venue, Rionette is still tormenting Freed. Freed wonders how long she plans to keep doing this stuff, so Rionette explains that she will keep going until Rick returns. Freed confidently declares that Rick won't be coming back because his family is taking care of him, but Freed is shocked when Rick casually says he is back. Rionette sends the Freed into a wall, and Rick wonders what happened to the place. Rionette assures him that everything is fine, and she only destroyed a small part of the wall. Just then injured Lynx appears, and Lynx explains that Raster beat him up. Rick is horrified to hear this, because Rick realizes that Raster did this so he could be in charge of his exam. Lynx told Raster that his dream was to build a school in his hometown, but Raster just mocked and tormented him. Lynx couldn't do anything against someone powerful like Raster, and now Lynx thinks that having a dream at his age is foolish. Lynx fears that Raster will do something much worse to Rick, so Lynx begs him to drop out of the exam. Rick refuses to do so, and declares that he wants everyone to know that it is fine to start doing things at any age. Back with Raster, he is busy taking out more of his own men, and one of his guards explains that there is an intruder. Raster is glad though when he realizes that Rick has decided to come. Raster thought that Rick would have dropped out by now, but this is okay with him, as Raster promises to show Rick what real fear looks like. Raster makes a grand display of his magic, but Rick angrily declares that he will send Raster flying. In this stands a guy named Adolf, who watches the A rank exam and explains the 4 cores of power to us. They are physical strength, dexterity, mana capacity, and magic control. Adolf has the ability to visualize the scores of other people's 4 cores of power, and he demonstrates it to one of the participants. Adolf checks Raster and is amazed by his A rank scores. His eyes feel a bit strained because it is dangerous for him to look at anyone too strong. Adolf decides to check Rick's stats, but they are so great that his eyes feel like they are about to explode, and Adolf screams in pain. Nearby, Alicia and Rionette introduce themselves to each other. The other members of Rionette's party call her over, so Rionette invites Alicia to join them. Alicia is shocked to see an orc sitting there, and Rionette declines Mizet's offer to sit next to him because Rionette knows that Mizet has bad intentions. Mizet offers the seat to Alicia after he takes an interest in her, but Rionette gets Alicia out of safety. Rick finally enters the arena, and Brufston asks Rionette how their rookie will do. Rionette reveals that he will pass the exam, but Alicia points out that it won't be so easy because Rick is going against Raster. Raster is in A rank, and he always goes overboard to embarrass all the rookies. Alicia is shocked though when the members of Rick's party say it won't be a concern. Raster's siblings cheer him on, and Raster is impressed that Rick is able to get away from his guards. Raster declares that he is nothing like his weak guards, but Rick can tell that just by looking at him. Rick wonders why Raster became an adventurer in the first place, so Raster explains that he is a noble, so he just did it to raise his status even further. Raster has actually grown bored of being an adventurer and he is just waiting for the perfect time to quit. Rick can tell that this guy is not a real adventurer, so Rick refuses to lose to someone like him. Raster starts to fight off with a level 1 attack, but he wonders if Rick is terrified after not moving at all. Rick isn't scared, as Rick is just reminding himself not to let his anger control him. AnimeT told him to use the first minute of his fight to calm himself and observe his opponent. Rick does that, but Raster is impatient, and Rick is stunned to see him use level 3 magic without an incantation. The insanely powerful attack hits Rick, but Rick remains standing strong as he is analyzing his opponent just like AnimeT said. Alicia is worried about him, but Bruston says that an attack like that is nothing for Rick. Bruston explains that out of the 4 core of power, a magic reserve has to be developed before a person reaches the age of 20, otherwise there is no hope for further growth. Rick became an adventurer at 30, so his magic reserves are extremely low. However, Bruston had a solution, and we see in the past that Bruston told Rick that the one thing he could always depend on was his body, and he decided that they would take a little stroll to the next town over. The problem was that Bruston strapped Rick to giant weights, which were 100 kilograms each. Rick was horrified, but Bruston just told him to hurry up, because there was a den of carnivorous monsters in the forest. To make up for Rick's lack of magic reserves, Rick trained exhaustively in the other 3 areas. Raster attacks Rick with level 4 magic this time, but Rick once again is unfazed. Then Bruston reveals that for physical strength, he built Rick up from scratch. Even Mizet hates doing bothersome things, but Mizet was the one who taught Rick magic control. Mizet took this responsibility because he didn't want Rick turning into a pile of ash after an attack one day. Rick was trained in dexterity by AnimeT, and Alicia is shocked to learn that AnimeT is not just some normal maid. Rick amazingly stuck onto all the training they threw at him, and now Rick stands within the S ranks, just like the rest of them. Raster unleashes another attack, and AnimeT explains that Rick has no awareness of how powerful he is. This is because no matter what kind of insane training they put Rick through, they always told him that an F rank should be able to do it easily. Just like the time Bruston told him that an F rank can smash through a giant boulder with one strike. Raster does some trash talking as he unleashes a barrage of attacks, and Alicia is horrified when one attack seems to crush Rick. Raster mockingly says that he went a bit overboard, but Raster is stunned when Rick emerges unharmed. Raster is annoyed by his resilience, and his siblings are shocked by the old man's strength. Raster powers himself up to finish the battle with his fists, but Rick just easily knocks him back. Now Rick finally understands what AnimeT was telling him. Raster is so obsessed with the talents he was born with, that Raster neglects to refine them further. Raster has vast reserves of magic, but Raster is sloppy with everything he does. Against an opponent like Raster, Rick is sure that he can't lose. Raster says that Rick just got lucky, and his siblings are amazed when he finally decides to use his full incantation magic. His long incantation results in a crazy big fireball attack, but everyone is shocked when Rick easily stops it with just one hand. Rick says that the attack was too sloppy, and Mizet explains that Rick worked his magic with a high degree of accuracy to block the attack. Rick was so precise that he didn't have to use 100,000th of the energy that Raster did to create the attack. This means that someone like Rick, with barely any magic reserves, can do stuff like that as long as they have precise magic control. Raster continues to say that Rick is just getting lucky and goes in for another attack. Rick is too quick for him, so Raster changes his body to steel to avoid getting obliterated. Raster finally admits that Rick possesses abilities above an E rank, but still says that luck is choosing Rick's side. Rick can't believe that Raster still refuses to acknowledge him, so Rick points out that he isn't even using magic. Rick is just using dexterity. Raster just wants to know how Rick got so strong in just 2 years, but Rick is insulted by the question as he thinks about his torturous training. Rick had to run through explosions, swim through the monster's paralyzing fluid until he choked on it, and Rick wasn't allowed out of a dragon's nest until he defeated it. Alicia is horrified to hear just some of the training Rick went through, because normally someone wouldn't survive it. Then Alicia is shocked when Bruston reveals that Rick didn't survive it. Rick lost his life multiple times, but Bruston's healing can bring someone back to life as long as it is applied immediately after passing away. This kind of horrifying training was necessary, because repeatedly breaking down and rebuilding someone's body is how they get stronger. Mizet was also impressed by how Rick stayed in there, no matter how crazy the training got. Mizu thinks back to his training with Rick, and how he kicked Rick off a mountain, so Rick could develop a sense of being able to feel the wind. This of course leads Rick to lose his life repeatedly, and Brufston have to revive him. Alyssarette was just as guilty of this type of training, as we see that Alyssarette crushes Rick under boulders. Rionet's training involved learning to cut falling trees by using their momentum, but this caused Rick to lose his life as well. Raster just assumes that Rick is lying because he refuses to believe that such terrible training even exists, and even if it did exist, Raster can't see anyone being motivated enough to go through it. Rick's response is simple. His dream is his motivation, and his dream is to defeat the world's strongest monster, Kaiser Alsapiet. Raster and Fried have a good laugh, as they call Rick an idiot, and they can't believe that he is being serious. Alicia knows that Kaiser Alsapiet is the ultimate monster that appears in the legends of the hero Yamato, and Brufston reveals that Rick's goal is also the ultimate goal of their group, the Orichalcum Fist. Raster points out that the legends of the hero Yamato are just bedtime stories for kids, and defeating Kaiser is the dream of a small child. Rick doesn't care what Raster thinks, as his dream has nothing to do with him anyway. Raster agrees, and decides to put an end to their battle. Raster surprisingly uses level 7 magic to restrain Rick, and Raster tells Rick not to get too amazed just yet. Raster plans to show Rick what true talent looks like, and he wants to make it so Rick can never speak nonsense again. Raster finishes a long incantation, and declares that he will show everyone the greatest magic a human can wield, level 8 nature composed magic. This is the greatest magic that Raster, the man of 1,000 spells, has in his arsenal. This is Raster's ultimate move, and it results in Raster controlling a giant tree golem from the inside. Raster commands Rick to grovel before him, and he mocks Rick for planning to use some airshot attack. Rick declares that he will punch right through him, but Raster says he is being delusional. Rick asked Raster how many times he had practiced using the golem before, but Raster had no clue, because he mastered it after only using it a couple of times. Then Rick shockingly reveals that he has used his airshot attack 100 million times. Raster's siblings think he is lying, and Alicia wonders if 100 million times in 2 years is even physically possible. Of course Brufston reveals that it is possible, but only if space-time magic is used. Raster has heard enough, so he announces that it's time to crush Rick's dreams, just like he did to Link's. Raster launches his most powerful level 8 attack, but Rick breaks free from the restraints and shockingly stops the attack with his level 1 airshot attack. Raster mocks him as he assures that he will crush Rick, but Raster is stunned when his golem begins to break apart. Then Rick's airshot destroys Raster's golem. Raster refuses to believe that this could happen to a noble like him, but his golem is destroyed and Raster is sent flying into the stands. Now Rick taunts the so-called noble elite, and points out that his dream is still completely unscathed. Everyone is amazed to see Rick victorious, because Rick just looks like a normal old guy. Rick's group congratulates him on his victory, and Rick finally realizes that he really has gotten a lot stronger. Rick can't believe that he didn't realize how strong he actually is until now, and thanks everyone for helping him. Just then they hear Raster's siblings telling Raster to get medical treatment, but Raster is determined to speak with Rick. Rick can already tell that Raster is wondering how an elite like him could lose to a late starter like Rick. Fried is held back from defending his brother, but Rick just has an answer for Raster. Rick simply explains that he has a limited number of techniques he can use, but he trains himself for that exhaustively. Rick gives Raster some advice on how he can do the same, but Raster is still angry. Raster promises to be Rick's examiner again for his next promotion, and declares that he will win next time. Raster's siblings leave with him, but Angelica surprisingly shows Rick some respect. The next day the participants that pass the E-rank exam are announced over a loudspeaker. Their numbers are announced in order, so Rick patiently waits while his friends wait nearby. Rionette is surprised to see him so calm, so Rick explains that he was just remembering something. Rick thinks about his past, and how he wanted to become like Yamato. This meant becoming an adventurer to try and defeat Kaiser Alsapiet. Unfortunately, his mother thought it would be too dangerous, and his father wanted Rick to stop believing in fairy tales. One day Rick found some hope as the doctor discovered that Rick had a marker, indicating that he had an inherent skill. People with the marker are extremely rare, and Rick was one of them. Rick was stunned to learn that he could have an incredible power like Yamato, but Rick was told that it wasn't something a person could manifest through training. Rick was still excited, and he was told to just relax and wait for his skill to come out. Rick couldn't have been any happier, and Rick decided that once his skill manifested, he would proudly declare to his parents that he was going to be an adventurer. As the days pass, Rick's friend asks if his skill manifested yet. It still didn't show up after a year, but Rick kept his spirits up and thought that it would reveal itself when he wasn't a kid anymore. Eventually, Rick became discouraged, and he was told that there were cases where people with the marker never manifested their skill. There are still a lot of adventurers who don't have any skills, so his friend suggested that he become an adventurer anyway. They told Rick how much money he could make, but money wasn't why Rick wanted to become an adventurer in the first place. One day, Rick's mom was glad to hear that Rick was hired as a receptionist at a guild. His parents were proud of him for finding a stable job, so Rick accepted that this was his life now. Rick went about doing his new job, but he still continued testing to see if his skill had manifested. Years and years passed and Rick's parents aged, but Rick never stopped reading about the legends of Yamato. His daily life was as a receptionist, but Rick never gave up on his dream. One day Rick explained to Alicia that monsters had been driven out of their lairs, so they had been wandering into town. Things are starting to get a bit dangerous, and some new quests will be announced soon. They were mostly low-level monsters, so Rick assumed they would be D-rank quests. An adventurer named Zaid was a friend of Rick, and Zaid revealed that he was promoted to B-rank. This marked the moment when a person could make a living just by adventuring. Rick congratulated Zaid, but he couldn't help but be upset with himself. Rick had done the same job for 14 years, and he was gone nowhere. Meanwhile, Zaid had been promoted several times. Rick didn't have much to complain about because his life was pretty stable, but Rick couldn't help but think how far he would have gone if he had decided to become an adventurer. Just then Rick heard screaming as a giant monster appeared in town. Rick was shocked because it was incredibly rare for a mid-level monster to be there. Rick heroically tried to protect a girl, but she just told him to get out of the way. This girl destroyed the monster, and Rick was shocked as this girl simply thanked him for trying to save her. This was when Rick first met Rionette, and Rionette revealed that she was an adventurer. Rick assumed that Rionette was a B rank, but Rionette was not. Then Rick was sure that Rionette was an A rank, and Rick was super excited because he had never seen an adventurer fight up close. Then Rick was stunned when Rionette said she wasn't an A rank either, and she was actually an S rank. Rick was incredibly nervous because S rank are the top of the all. Rick had a question to ask her because Rionette is an S rank, and Rick hoped that she wouldn't laugh at him. Rionette explained that laughing would not be a concern, because since the 9 years that had passed since she was 8 years old, she had never laughed. Rick just told everything, and revealed that he always dreamed of defeating Kaiser Alsapiet. On top of that, Rick also has an inherent skill that hasn't manifested yet. Rick explained that he was 30 years old, so Rick asked her if she thought there was still time for him to become an adventurer. Rionette acknowledged that Rick had courage, because he tried to save her, but Rick was 30 years old, and he never trained his magic reserves. Rick already knew about this limitation, but Rionette explained that it is not just hard to develop magic resistance after not training it when you were young, it's basically impossible. Adventurers need at least some magic reserves, so Rionette was confident that Rick had no chance of making it as an adventurer. Rick kept a positive attitude as always, and he thanked Rionette for the reality check. Rick could finally stop clinging to the dream he should have given up years ago. Rionette apologized, but Rick said he needed to hear that. Rick talked non-stop, hoping to mask his disappointment, and jokingly asked her to have a meal with him. Rick was shocked when Rionette accepted his offer, and she made plans for them the next day. The next day, Alicia could tell that Rick was in a good mood, and Rick excitedly told her that they should work their hardest. Zaid arrived, and the happy Rick excitedly gave him his quest. Rick couldn't believe that he was having dinner with a girl like Rionette, and he realized that his life wasn't so bad after all. Just then people began scrambling as a monster had appeared, and Rick's good mood was ruined. Rick got worried when he spotted Rionette, but he remembered that she could handle herself easily. Then Rick was startled when several more monsters appeared, but Rionette told them that she would handle them. Rick knew that he would only get in the way, so he stood aside while Rionette started destroying the monster. She tore them to pieces, and Rick was amazed to see what an S rank could do. Rionette finished up the last monster, but Rionette became concerned when she sensed something. Rionette had a flashback to a horrible memory, and she collapsed because of the terrifying magical energy. Another monster arrived to attack them, but Zaid appeared out of nowhere to rescue them. Some other adventurers showed up, and Zaid explained that the guild put together an emergency quest. Then adventurers worked together by using their amazing abilities, and they started annihilating the monsters. Rick thought he had already given up on becoming an adventurer, but watching this group fight made Rick realize that he was still jealous of them. AnimeT warned him that it was too dangerous there, but Rick said they would be fine because Zayit is a B rank. AnimeT was still terrified, and revealed that a B rank wouldn't be enough to fight the threat that was nearby. Rick was shocked, and AnimeT revealed that the threat was a dragon. AnimeT said that every time she feels a dragon's magic, she loses control of the magic within her body. Rick was sure that a dragon would never appear there, but he was quickly proven wrong. A gigantic dragon appeared before them, and even Zayit couldn't believe that one would appear in a human town. Everyone was taught at the Adventurers Guild that anyone lower than a B rank should never try to fight a dragon. One guy from the group panicked and tried to attack it, but it quickly became very clear that there was no way they could fight the dragon when it pushed them back with just the force of its wing. The group decided to run for their lives, but they were stopped by the dragon's barrier. They aren't able to destroy the barrier, so they realized that the dragon is not planning to let them get away. Zayit gave up as he believed their lives were over, but Rick shockingly stepped forward. Zayit reminded him that he was just a receptionist, and there was nothing he could do. It turned out that Rick also thought they wouldn't survive, but if he at least stood up to the dragon, then he might at least be able to spend the last moments of his life as an adventurer. However, after coming face to face with the dragon, Rick realized that they wouldn't even be able to put up a fight. Rick was terrified, but he could still feel a fire burning inside of him. Rick thought he had given up on becoming an adventurer, but this feeling inside of him made him realize that this was actually the way he wanted to live. Then Rick bravely launched the rock at the dragon, but it didn't do anything. Zayit was inspired by what Rick had done, so he told the other adventurers that they couldn't let a receptionist show them up. Then newly inspired adventurers fiercely attacked the dragon. The powerful dragon used its fire breath on them, but Zayit temporarily turned everyone to iron to protect them. The blast was too powerful, so everyone was injured, and Zayit determined that this was really the end for them. AnimeT hated herself for not being able to fight the dragon, but it was too late anyway, as the dragon prepared to end them all. Everyone had given up, but they were stunned when Rick emerged from the rubble. Rick became very serious, and Rick vowed that he would make his dream come true no matter what. AnimeT was horrified when she could only watch as the dragon crushed him. Just then a voice declared that Rick had acquired a skill, and everyone was stunned when Rick lifted the dragon's foot. No one could believe their eyes, and they couldn't even recognize Rick. Rick didn't look like himself at all, and there was so much magic overflowing from him that it was actually visible. Rick realized that his inherent skill must have just manifested, and he wondered what took it so long. Rick gained a ton of confidence, so Rick told the giant dragon to give him everything it had so he could test out his new skill. The dragon launched attack after attack, but Rick blocked them all. Eventually Rick fought back, and his attack was so incredibly powerful that it blew a hole right through its barrier and the dragon. Everyone including Rick was stunned by what just happened, and Rick humbly said that wasn't so bad just before he collapsed. A while later Rick woke up in immense pain, and AnimeT informed Rick that every magic circuit in his body was destroyed. Rick had been asleep for an entire week, and he was shocked to hear that AnimeT sat by his side the entire time. Rick couldn't understand why, so AnimeT revealed that she was waiting so she could invite him to join the party she belonged to, the Orichalcum Fists. Rick didn't believe her, but AnimeT explained that they share a common goal, and that is to defeat Kaiser Alsapiet. Rick was even more shocked by this part, because it confirmed that Kaiser Alsapiet actually exists. Rick fought with courage alone, so AnimeT was confident that he would be able to grow stronger and fight alongside her group. AnimeT guaranteed that he would become an adventurer, and this was the first time anyone ever said anything like that to him. Rick broke down from the sense of relief, and he wondered if it was really okay for him to try and become an adventurer. AnimeT assured him that it was okay, and Rick couldn't hold back tears. Back to the present, Rick's numbers were announced, and AnimeT congratulated him on officially becoming a fully qualified adventurer. Rick credits his mentors for teaching him, and he thanks his old self for never giving up on his dream. Lynx congratulates Rick on passing and reminds him about the drink they're supposed to get. Rick thinks it is a great idea, but he is shocked when Lynx expresses an interest in meeting his party and asks to visit them. Rick's face makes it clear that he is hesitant, but he agrees to let him meet them. A while later Lynx is on his way to visit, but he thinks it's strange that Rick told him to his most powerful equipment. Lynx arrives at the designated location, but Lynx doesn't believe he is at the right place because it looks like the Demon Lord's castle. After ringing the bell to the place, Rick comes to greet him. Lynx noticed that there were no monsters on his way to this place, so Rick explained that monsters don't go near there. This makes Lynx wonder why he needed to bring armor if not for monsters, so Rick explains that the armor will keep him out of a coffin. Then Lynx is introduced to the girls of the group. Lynx hopes his own daughter will end up happy like Kitaerarete, but he is shocked when Kitaerarete uses a level 6 spell by just saying the word boom. Rick rescues Lynx from being obliterated, and he scolds Kitaerarete for using magic in the castle. Lynx is stunned to hear that she just wanted to play, and AnimeT explains that she will have to deduct the cost of repairs from Kitaerarete's food budget. Kitaerarete begs for forgiveness, so Rick decides to spend some time with her so she can calm down. Lynx is left to relax for a while, and he marvels at how huge the place is. Lynx goes to see Mizet outside, and Mizet explains that making crazy weapons is a hobby of his. Lynx tries out his latest weapon, and Mizet instructs them to put magic into it while pulling the trigger. The powerful recoil sends Lynx flying backwards, and the shot does major damage. The recoil was a bit too much, so Mizet decided that he would have to make some changes to the weapon. Lynx is stunned by the weapon, because if it were mass-produced, then it would change war forever. Lynx is beginning to see just how crazy this place is, and he meets Brufston next. Being surrounded by books calms Brufston, and Lynx wonder if this intellectual orc is also a member of the party. Brufston says that he has read most of the books in his library, but he hasn't had much time to read recently because he has been training Rick. Brufston offers to give Lynx a training lesson as well, so Lynx eagerly accepts. Brufston likes the look that Lynx has in his eyes, as he senses the same light he sees in Rick. A while later, Rick is shocked to hear that Lynx went with Brufston into the forest. Rick is terrified because he knows how dangerous that is. Then we see the terrified Lynx screams, because he thinks his life is about to end. Lynx goes flying off a mountain, and he says goodbye to his wife and kids. Luckily, Lynx lands safely on the food that AnimeT has gathered for dinner. AnimeT notices the weights attached to Lynx and determines that this was Brufston's doing. Lynx confirms this as he explains that Brufston told him to run down a slope so steep, it was basically a cliff. Lynx is sure that he wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for AnimeT, and she explains that Brufston ended Rick's life the most out of everyone that trained him. Lynx is so terrified by that statement that Lynx pretends he didn't hear it, and Brufston arrives to continue their training. Afterwards, Lynx is relieved to still be alive, and he tells Rick that Brufston was only supposed to give him some light training. Rick warns Lynx that he can't believe any of them when they talk about easy training, but Brufston arrives to point out that he can just bring people back to life if the training eliminates them. Rick reminds him how fragile lives are, but Kitaerarete is tired of all the talking and just wants to play again. As the guys wait for dinner, Lynx wonders how close Rick has gotten to AnimeT. Rick explains that the relationship isn't like that, especially because he is too old. Lynx shocks him when he explains that he and his wife are 20 years apart in age. Lynx gives Rick some words of encouragement as he explains that all that matters is how they feel about each other. That night, everyone enjoys the feast AnimeT made, and they all compliment her. AnimeT goes to get some wine, so Lynx tells Rick that this is the perfect time to go and help her so they can get closer. Rick rushes off to help AnimeT, and Lynx asks to learn more about Rick's inherent skill. Brufston reveals that Rick's skill is a type that is activated by certain conditions. This means that Rick is not able to activate it himself. However, thanks to the training, Rick now stands within the realm of S rank, even without his skill or weapons. Rick's skill is called Reckless Soul, and if it were to activate, he would surpass everyone, even the other members of Orichalcum Fist. Brufston has a question for Lynx as well, because he works at Central. Brufston would like to know about the magic stones, known as the 6 jewels. They are the ones in the legends of Yamato, and Rick explains that their goal is to defeat Kaiser Alsapiet. The 6 jewels are magic stones that open the door to the place where Kaiser Alsapiet sleeps. The 6 jewels are activated every 200 years, and they should be emitting a large amount of magic right at this moment, as they have reached that part of the cycle. Lynx always questioned if the stories were real, but hearing them talk like this makes him confident. Lynx has no information about the stones right now, but he promises to check the confidential department to see if he can find something. Just then Rick asks if Lynx has any other good advice. Rick tries to help AnimeT like Lynx said, but she is great at everything and doesn't need much help. The next day, a new adventurer wonders why she has to clean the guild when she has the ability to defeat monsters. She spots Brufston asking to take on a certain job, but he is denied. Brufston can't understand why, because the job's danger level is only 82 and they can handle it easily. The girl adventurer thinks this group looks pretty strange, and she thinks about how she has never seen the guild master be so different from adventurers before. Rick uses his receptionist skills to see that they can take on this job as long as they have 2 A ranks in a 4-person party. Brufston asks if they can have some help finding a 4th person, so the guild master agrees. He reminds the girl named Ray that she wanted to go on a quest with a higher danger level, but she is a bit hesitant to join the strange party. The guild master assures her that they are great adventurers, but all Ray sees is a talking orc, a little girl and some old guy. Ray really wants to do a quest, so she gladly decides to lend them her strength. On the quest, the group makes it clear that they are searching for a magic stone. Lynx told them that it should be in this area, and Ray wondered if it was worth a lot of money. The stone is quite valuable, but it is dangerous to handle without proper precautions, and it is capable of drawing monsters to it. Ray isn't worried, because she is confident that she can handle any monster. Ray is only an F rank right now, but she is sure that she will be an A rank in no time. Rick reveals that he just reached E rank, and Ray realizes that Rick is some late starter old man just like she thought. Back at home, Rionette hopes that the others are okay. Mizet reminds her that Brufston is with them, so they should be fine. Mischief Mizet uses his gadgets to try to get a peek at Rionette. Rionette stops him and destroys his machine. Back with Rick, Brufston determines that they are getting to the lair they are looking for. Ray is terrified to see a wyvern, and shocked that they are looking for a wyvern lair. Ray warns Brufston not to get too close to the wyvern without a plan first, but Brufston just doesn't seem concerned. Brufston tells the ferocious wyvern to move, and he sends it flying across the forest, and Brufston tells Ray that the plan is just to knock down any monsters he sees. Ray fears that his attack will just cause more wyvern to appear, but that is actually what Brufston wants. Brufston tells Rick to get Ray to a safe area so she doesn't turn to ash, and Ray is horrified to hear how much danger she is in. Rick takes Ray to an open field and reminds her that she is supposed to be strong. Just then a wyvern gets tossed right next to them, and we see that Alyssarette and Brufston make quick work of a group of wyverns. Ray is shocked by how far they are throwing the wyvern, and she is startled when a giant red wyvern appears before her. Even an A rank would have a hard time against one of these, so Ray thinks they should run. Rick agrees that they should run away, but there is something he wants to check. Rick refuses to back down even if the odds are against them, so Ray decides that she will have to fight by his side. Rick can see how determined Ray is, so Rick allows her to back him up. Ray begins preparing a spell to protect Rick, but she is utterly stunned when Rick absolutely destroys the wyvern. Rick celebrates, as this confirms that he really is strong. The next day Ray is exhausted, and the guild master explains that nothing good ever happens when the Orichalcum Fist shows up. A look back to the day before shows Ray wondering what they were going to do with the wyvern corpse. Their answer was pretty surprising, as Rick explained that Rionette was going to cook it for dinner. Ray can't believe that anyone would eat a wyvern, so the guild master explains that people say that members of the Orichalcum Fist are the strongest in the continent. Guild master hopes that Ray's experience with them made her realize that she shouldn't be going on dangerous missions, but actually just motivated her to train harder. Back with our group, we see that they were successful in obtaining one of the 6 jewels, called the Red Flower. It has an incredible amount of magic in it, and it should help them find the other jewels. Alyssarette wants to be the one to activate it, but everyone decides against that because she would just blow it up, as she does to everything. Mizet is the one to do it, and a map of a large city pops up. The city is called Heractopia, and combat flourishes in that country. They are also famous for their Colosseum. Then we see a fight taking place at this Colosseum, as the girl is announced the winner. Then we learn that 400 years ago, King Alexander built the Colosseum. The king held fighting competitions, and King himself fought with no weapons, but with his fist. Alexander reigned as the undefeated champion of 10,000 fights. Then people from all over the world came to either watch him or fight him. This small kingdom grew exponentially, and it is now known as the Kingdom of Heractopia. Rick and the others arrive at this kingdom and stare at a statue of Alexander, who is known as the first king. Fighting for entertainment is a huge business here, so being a fighter is a popular occupation. These professional fighters are called fist fighters. Brufston wishes he could have sparred with King Alexander at least once when he was alive, but Rick fears that they would have destroyed the kingdom. Our group tries to get information on the 6 jewels, but people are terrified of the Brufston. Just then they notice some bald guy bothering a girl. Brufston decides to ask them for some information, but the creep says he is not intimidated by orcs, because he is a fighter. Bruston straight up tells this guy that he doesn't look very strong, so the creep challenges him to meet him in an alley. Bruston takes the guy up in his offer, and easily beats him. The guy's name is Gold, and the girl's name is Melisha, and they offer to answer any questions. Rick shows them the red flower, and explains that there should be another one of these gems in this kingdom. They are amazed by the magic emitted from the stone. Our group is shocked when they say they have seen one like it before. They can't remember where, so Rick begs them to think harder. Just then they're interrupted by the announcement parade of the King of Fists tournament. It is a fighting tournament to determine the champion fighter. It will take place in 2 months, and it gets over 500,000 audiences every year. A guy named Kelvin is a 5-time champion who has won the last 3 tournaments in a row. This guy is insanely popular, and everyone is shocked when they realize that the stone they are looking for is attached to the champion belt Kelvin is wearing. Kelvin thanks his supporters for cheering him on, and he explains to a trainer that it is his job as a fist fighter to create excitement for the tournament. The trainer can tell that Kelvin still is in good health, but Kelvin says that he will just be happy if he can find a worthy opponent. Just then Rick enters the gym and explains that adventurers are looking for a certain gem. Bruston wants to get right to the point, and Kelvin is shocked by his appearance. Rick says that they need to follow proper procedures when speaking to a stranger, but Bruston says that he isn't the type. Bruston tells Kelvin to give him the belt, and Rick has to clear things up by explaining that they aren't thieves. Bruston explains that the gem on the belt used to belong to their party. Bruston says that they will return the belt and give him an equivalent gem in exchange. The trainer plans to throw them out, but Kelvin stops him. Kelvin explains that he has a good nose, and he can tell that they aren't lying. While Kelvin does believe them, he cannot allow them to take the belt. The belt is the pride of the people of Heractopia, and the only way for them to get the belt is by standing at the top of the King of Fists tournament. Bruston surprisingly agrees with him, and they leave. The trainer wonders why Kelvin just let them leave because he wanted to let their rookie fighters beat them up. Kelvin explains that everyone would have lost their lives if they tried to fight Rick and his group. The trainer is shocked because he had no clue that they were that strong. Kelvin could tell that while the mate seemed very calm, she had incredible skills. Rick was also unremarkable looking, but Kelvin could sense that he had trained his body to an extraordinary degree. Rick doesn't emit the powerful aura, so Kelvin considers his total strength to be unknown. As for the orc, Kelvin is excited because he is the real deal. Nearby Bruston explains that the new plan is to become fist fighter so they can win the King of Fist tournament. To enter the tournament, they will first have to pass some preliminaries on either the east or west side of the kingdom, and then go against those who qualified. Bruston decides to enter through the Eastern League, and he instructs Rick to enter through the West. Rick wonders if Bruston will be okay on his own, so Bruston explains that he has already arranged to have a guide. This guide turns out to be Gold. Afterwards, Rionette explains that Rick must pass a test to become a fighter before anything. Tons of people from around the world take this test in the hope of obtaining glory, and Rick says that it sounds like fun. The first test is a physical mock battle, and opponents are selected at random. Rick's opponent is a promising newbie who has won each of their bouts in the tournament preliminaries. Winning or losing isn't important, because participants can still pass as long as they meet a certain standard. Just then Rick is shocked to recognize the voice of his opponent, and it turns out to be Angelica. Angelica makes her grand entrance, but she is horrified to see Rick. The small audience cheers her on, and they predict that she will quickly destroy Rick. Rick fears that Raster is there as well, but Angelica explains that she came alone. Angelica thinks about how bad things are for her, since her opponent is the old guy that beat her A-rank brother. Even winning doesn't matter right now. Angelica refuses to suffer defeat in a mock battle. Rick still doesn't look very strong to her, but Angelica doesn't plan to let her guard down like last time. The test begins, and Angelica vows to go all out right from the start this time. Angelica says the name of her powerful attack, but she instantly falls to the ground. Angelica thinks she just lost her balance, but she falls again. Rick stands over her and wonders what she thinks about this new skill he has learned in the last few months. Angelica is shocked to hear that he has been knocking her down, and Rick explains that this skill is called the 8 holdback technique. Secret number 1 is continually sweeping the legs of his opponent to demoralize them. Angelica is horrified because this means that Rick has been sweeping her legs so fast that that even a knight second class can't see it. Angelica doesn't believe that such a skill could exist, but it is entirely possible when it comes to Rick. Angelica creates some distance between them, but Rick once again just knocks her down. Rick keeps doing it, but Angelica says that this isn't nearly enough to make her give up. Then Rick decides to fight seriously, so Angelica's bluff is called, and she surrenders. Rick is a fighter now, so he heads to the qualifier. However, just then, Angelica stops him to wonder how many times he plans to humiliate her. Rick doesn't want her to cry, so he offers to take her to get something to eat. Militia's parents own the restaurant, so Militia tells them to just relax and enjoy some freebies. Angelica is shocked to hear that Rick plans to win the King of Fist tournament, because it sounds like a crazy dream. Angelica became a fighter 4 months ago, and she plans to enter the tournament as well. Angelica thought that Rick was going to try to win the tournament next year, but she was shocked that Rick wanted to win this year's tournament. Angelica says that Rick's power strains the bounds of logic, but she is sure that it won't be possible for him to win. Angelica explains that the path to the King of Fists tournament is a long one. First of all, only those who win 40 bouts over the half year of preliminaries earn the right to participate in the league competition. Rick thinks that all he has to do is win a bunch, but it is not that simple. The fights are extremely brutal, so most people fight 10 bouts per month. There is only 1 week left, and winning 40 bouts in just 1 week is physically impossible. Rick is shocked to hear this, because he thought that 10 fights a day would be easy, so Rick requested to have 40 bouts in 4 days. Angelica is horrified, and she wishes Rick would stop breaking the laws of common sense. The next day Rick goes to have his first preliminary bout. Rick's opponent is someone named Albert, but he is told that there are rumors about Albert breaking the rules by using a weapon. No evidence was found during body checks, so Rick is just told to be careful. Rick faces off against this guy, and is glad to see that he doesn't have a weapon. However, we see that Albert has a hidden stone that increases the force of his attacks by 30 times. The fight begins and Albert uses his coat to obstruct Rick's vision. His attack is powerful, and Albert declares his victory. It's too soon, as the pain from his broken arm eventually kicks in. Rick sees the impact stone and points out that it will break its user's bones if they haven't trained hard enough. Albert thinks about how he did train, but it is too late as Rick declares that it is his turn to attack. Rick uses secret number 2 from his 8 holdback technique, which is a skill that uses the shock wave from a passing punch to shake his opponent's brain and cause unconsciousness. The point of his 8 secrets is to win the fight without causing major injury to his opponents, and everyone is shocked to witness it. Albert is out cold, so Rick is announced as the winner. One guy is glad to see someone so powerful, and he determines that this year's tournament will be one for the ages. Elsewhere we get a look at some fearsome monster-looking guy, and he is told that it's nearly time to get to work. Later Angelica participates in her own match, and she absolutely destroys her opponent. Rick congratulates her on making it through the preliminaries, and Angelica brags about winning 40 matches in a row. Angelica also intends on winning her way through the block league, and Rick is eager to do his best. Angelica still can't believe that he's going to try and do 40 matches in 4 days, because each venue only hosts 1 bout per day. This means Rick will have to travel a long distance between preliminary matches, but Angelica doesn't think it's possible. Rick has to get to the Green Hill Arena in 10 minutes before his next fight, but Angelica gets annoyed because he isn't listening. This arena is 30 kilometers away, and he won't be able to get there in time, even if he rode in a carriage. Rick calls her crazy for even suggesting that he ride on a slow carriage, because he had rather just run. Angelica says that makes even less sense, but Rick shows that he is much faster than a carriage. Angelica would like to watch Rick's match, but there is no possible way she could make it in time. Rionette says she can make it happen, so she jumps over the builds to get there. At the venue we see that Rick already finished his match, but Angelica is in no shape to watch. Rick won, but he still needs to work on his 8 holdback technique, because he did too much damage. Rick heads to the next venue, so Angelica tries to avoid being dragged away again, but Rionette takes her away anyway. Then the 3 of them go from arena to arena, as Rick destroys several opponents. The 4 days pass, and Angelica is stunned, because Rick actually managed to win the 40 matches he needed for the preliminaries. Next is the block league matches, and Angelica is relieved that she is not in the same block as Rick. Angelica was hoping to win the entire tournament, but she realizes now that it will be impossible with Rick around. To make things worse, AnimeT explains that the S-rank Bruston is participating as well. Angelica thinks that no matter how things seem, she still can't let a certain person get away with something. AnimeT wonders what Angelica is talking about, but Angelica just changes the topic. Angelica wonders where Rick is, so AnimeT explains that Rick is out on his daily 600 kilometers run. Angelica isn't even surprised anymore by the crazy stuff Rick does, and Angelica wonders how AnimeT puts up with him. AnimeT is always with Rick, so Angelica pities her for people probably thinking that they are in love. Surprisingly, AnimeT doesn't mind, as AnimeT reveals that she has a deep affection for Rick. Some guy approaches them, so Angelica thinks he is trying to flirt with them. Embarrassingly for her, the guy just needs their help with some work because he doesn't have enough staff. Rick finishes his run, and he is met by the chairman of the Western League's management committee. His name is Snape, and he is impressed by Rick for being the fastest qualifier in the preliminary league's history. The lizard man is told that Angelica isn't there, and Rick is surprised that he knows her. Then Snape is the one to be surprised when Rick can tell that he is a retired fighter, and Rick explains that he knew Snape was a fighter from their handshake. Snape reveals that he last fought 20 years ago, when he won a little competition. The roar of the crowd was rejuvenating, but Snape retired when he was just 23 years old. That competition ended up being the first and last time he won anything. Snape doesn't compete anymore, but his company has entered someone in this year's competition. As Snape leaves, he tells Rick to say hello to Angelica for him, but Snape also wants him to warn her not to get too excited. Afterwards, Melisha seems worried, and she reveals that Snape is from the Dragonaut Company. Snape makes himself appear like a gentleman, but there are rumors that he is connected to the underworld. Snape is the lead sponsor of this year's competition, and sponsors are given one slot for a competitor in the tournament. Just then Rick overhears some guys talking about this year's bunny girls. They fawn over a newcomer, and they call her a dark elf girl. Then we see the bunny girls they are talking about, Angelica and AnimeT, who have agreed to help the guy from earlier. The job of the bunny girls is to build excitement for the tournament and to take bets. AnimeT only agreed to do it because Angelica did, and Angelica says that she couldn't turn down someone asking for help with blood on their face. Some drunk guy makes all the bunny girls uncomfortable, but he pays the price when he tries to touch Angelica. Angelica gets really embarrassed when Rick arrives, and Angelica explains that she is helping someone. Rick is shocked at how great AnimeT looks, and Angelica becomes furious because Rick didn't react the same way to her. Elsewhere, the old gym leader reads about how Bruston was amazingly able to pass the preliminaries in just 2 days. What's even more incredible is that every one of his matches was decided by a single knockout blow. His accomplishment is getting all the attention, but Kelvin also points out that Rick was able to make it through the Western League in just 4 days. Kelvin isn't scared at all, and is just excited for this year's tournament. A look back we see when the gym owner first met Kelvin. The owner was stunned to see that Kelvin had just finished destroying a group of guys, and he called him by his nickname, which was the Hungry Wolf of the Slums. Kelvin asked the old man to clean up his mess, but the old guy refused. He explained that he was there to scout Kelvin and bring him back to Heractopia. In Heractopia, he would be able to obtain whatever he wanted by fighting and winning. That didn't seem very interesting to Kelvin, so the owner explained that there were a lot of strong fighters there. This sounded like much more fun to Kelvin, so Kelvin agreed to go. Kelvin has that same expression on his face now, and Kelvin explained that he hasn't been this excited in some time. Back with Rick, Angelica is still upset that Rick didn't look at her a certain way. Rick changes the topic and reveals that Snape was looking for her. Angelica is clearly surprised, but she denies knowing anyone by that name. The next day, the Block League competition to decide the tournament participants begins. Only one participant from each block can participate in the final tournament, so it will be really intense. Angelica faces off against a woman named Helen, but Rick can tell that Angelica doesn't seem like her usual self. Angelica is really tense, but she still manages to win. Rick is up next, and he uses one of his 8 holdback technique to defeat his opponent. AnimeT is pleased to see that Rick is getting better at holding back, but Angelica thinks he is just as ridiculous as ever. Then the two take turns winning fights, until there are only 4 matches left. Rick wants to discuss tactics because they have to win every match, but Angelica says that she doesn't need it. Angelica faces off against her next opponent, and Rick is impressed to see her combining her physical techniques with magic. However, Rick can tell that there is something dangerous about her opponent. This guy breaks through her magic, and he manages to land a devastating punch. Rick is concerned that she takes some serious damage, and it is announced that Angelica has been defeated. Angelica fought hard to press her opponent, but the guy named Taylor destroyed her with a single blow. Angelica gets healed, but her pride is still injured. Rick says that she was impatient and stubborn while fighting, but this just gets her more upset. Rick keeps trying to tell her that she could have won if she was more focused, so he wonders if something is bothering her. Rick isn't even sure if he will be able to do anything, but he wants to try and help her. Rick's kind words get Angelica to give in, and she reveals that Snape is her fiancé. Angelica explains that a year ago, her parents passed away in an accident. Angelica and her siblings took on the responsibilities of the household, but they were inexperienced and fell into great financial difficulties. Their evil grandfather stepped in and made a deal with Snape. Snape promised to provide them with a large sum of money, but he demanded to be allowed to marry Angelica. Rick has a seriously delayed reaction to the news, and Angelica becomes furious by his lack of ability to process information. Angelica goes on to explain that while trying to stop their marriage, she discovered that Snape had become the main sponsor for the tournament. Angelica prepares to reveal what Snape's true intentions are, but they are interrupted by some commotion. They find that some dragon guy that Angelica is horrified of is causing a stir, and he is being confronted by the guy that easily defeated Angelica earlier. Taylor tries to stop the dragon man from hurting a woman, but the dragon man tells him that he is getting too cocky. Then Angelica is shocked when the beast knocks Taylor out with just one blow. A waitress tries to calm the monster down, but he just ends up bothering her as well. Angelica jumps in to stop him, but this just infuriates the guy. He attacks Angelica, but Rick shocks everyone by stepping in and telling the guy to calm down. Just then Snape arrives and stops a dragon man named Geese. Snape tells Geese to save it for the tournament, so Geese leaves. Snape apologizes to the bar owner and explains that Geese is his brother. There is no one strong enough to beat him, so he is troublesome to deal with when he gets violent. Snape checks on Angelica, and he is glad to hear that she is not hurt. Snape leaves, so Angelica explains the connection between herself, Snape, and the tournament. Snape promised to give her family a very large amount of money, but her investigation found that Snape's company doesn't have nearly enough to pay. This made her realize that Snape intends to earn money through the tournament. Rick uses his brain to determine that Snape is going to use the sponsor slot to fix the outcome of the tournament, and Angelica confirms it. Because of this, Angelica decided to win the tournament, so Snape couldn't uphold his end of the deal, and the engagement would be cancelled. The problem is that Snape used his sponsor slot on Geese, and Angelica knows that she can't beat him. Angelica is stunned when Rick offers to train her, and Angelica begins to fear for her own life. Rick says that this training will be harsher than anything Angelica can even imagine, but she tells them not to hold back. Angelica is shocked when Rick puts some weights on her. Rick just tells her to remember her strengthening magic, so she doesn't end up dying, but Angelica wishes he would explain the training to her first. Rick ignores Angelica's pleas and just drags her along as he runs. Angelica freaks out as she has no idea what's going on, so Rick explains that she can get her body used to fast movement, but getting pulled by someone faster. Angelica has some really good acceleration, but her problem is that she loses her stability after that. Angelica begs Rick to stop for a moment, but Rick declares that the key to rapid improvement is to kick it up a notch when you think you are at your limit. Rick assures Angelica that it won't be so bad because there are only 6 more hours left of this. When it is over, Angelica can't believe that her legs are still attached to her body because she thought they fell off a long time ago. Rick went through the same training, and he even died 3 times on his first day. Angelica is proud to have survived, but Rick reveals that they still have afternoon training coming up after a short lunch break. Angelica begs for it to be over, but Rick seems to ignore it, as Rick just says that they will meet again in an hour. After 5 more days of training, Angelica convinces herself that she didn't run away from training, and she just made a tactical retreat to protect her mental health. Angelica is confident that Rick won't find her, but she is very wrong. Rick looked for her all over the country, but Angelica was shocked because it had only been 15 minutes since she ran away. Rick surprisingly understands why Angelica ran away, because he did the same thing during his 2 years of training. Rick ran away dozens of times, but he also died tens of thousands of times. One time Alessarette even had to share her mana with Brufston, so he could revive Rick another 2,000 times. This meant a lot more training and dying, so Rick had to get used to it. Rick was on the verge of giving up several times, but Bruston always gave him words of encouragement. Bruston told Rick to compare the regret he would feel if he gave up versus his current suffering. The weight of giving up was always heavier, so Rick kept going. Then Angelica describes all the things she hates about being a noble. Because of all those things, Angelica decided to contribute to her family as someone who fights, and not a noble lady. This is why Angelica dreams of becoming the first special class woman knight. Angelica doesn't want to feel the weight of regret either, so she is once again ready to train. Angelica is better suited to using a sword, but the tournament doesn't allow weapons. Because of this, Rick thinks it would be best to teach Angelica techniques that turn her hands into a sword. To do this, Rick has invited Rionette to join their training. A while later, it's time for the last match, between the top spots of Block C. This is Angelica's fight, but she is growling like a wild monster for some reason. The audience knows that Angelica's elegant fighting style won't work against this specific opponent, but there is something different about her. The fight begins, and everyone is shocked to see her attack, and Angelica instantly wins. Rick is pleased with the results of the training, but Angelica seems to be in some sort of trance. Afterwards, Mizet returns after following a lead about one of the other orbs. Unfortunately, it led to nothing. Then Mizet tries to get along with the waitress, but he gets rejected. That night, Bruston explains to Mizet that they will get another orb if they win the tournament. Alyssarette wants to join the tournament as well, but Rick fears that she will destroy the entire place if she does. Rick says that he is training Angelica, but Angelica is disappointed because there isn't enough time for her to train more. Everyone encourages Angelica, and they point out that even a little training will help drastically. Alyssarette has no clue what they're talking about, but she still tells everyone to do their best. After everyone gives their words of encouragement, Angelica is ready to give her all. The next day, the Fist King tournament begins. The first matches are announced, and we get a look at who Rick, Angelica, and Geese are fighting. Rick is just glad that he doesn't have to face Bruston, because if he did, then he would just give up. Bruston's opponent is some fish-looking guy, and Bruston's helper cheers him on. Kelvin is there as well, but someone in the audience is worried about his condition. Gym Leader isn't worried, because he is sure that Kelvin will win, no matter what condition he is in. The audience begins to make bets on who will win, but Angelica has noticed something. Geese was placed in the bracket in a spot where he won't have to face Bruston or Kelvin until the final. The match fixing has already begun, because Geese will be able to avoid tough opponents. It is clear to Angelica that they are going to make Geese look super strong to the crowd, and when the odds against them are high, Snape will bet on his opponent. Then Geese will throw the match and lose, so Snape can obtain a grand fortune. Angelica will meet him in the second round, so she is determined to ruin their plan. A little later, Kelvin says that he is happy to see Bruston and Rick at the tournament. Bruston reminds him that they are here for the belt, and they all look forward to facing each other. Gym Leader points out that Kelvin has the look of a challenger now, and he is glad because it reminds him of how Kelvin looked a long time ago. Gym Leader was talking about when he first brought Kelvin to his gym, and the Gym Leader boasted about having a fighter from his gym reach the top 4 in the tournament. Kelvin was allowed to fight this guy, and Kelvin wondered if he was also allowed to end his life. That is of course against the rules, just like using a weapon, but those are the only rules. Kelvin confidently told the guy not to get upset after losing, but Kelvin ended up being the one on the ground. Kelvin lost, but his extremely high potential was obvious, even though he had never been trained before. Kelvin changed after his first defeat, as Kelvin trained harder, so he could grasp victory. Kelvin began looking forward to losing to even stronger opponents, because he would then just train even more. This was the life Kelvin always wanted, and his endless training led to him shocking the world. Kelvin ended up decimating the champion in his first tournament. It's been 6 years since then, but Gym Leader is glad to see Kelvin's spirit burning once again. Soon the first match of the tournament begins, but Geese's opponent isn't able to do anything to him. The opponent demands that he take the fight seriously, but Geese just shocks everyone with the amount of power he can generate with a single swing. The opponent doesn't give up, and launches a barrage of attacks at an insane speed, but Geese just becomes more annoyed. Geese attacks again, but he unintentionally hits the guy, and knocks him out cold. Geese is announced as the winner, and everyone wonders if there has ever been a sponsor fighter this strong. It is clear that Geese is very strong, but Rick thinks something is strange. Even with all of Geese's power and toughness, his movements are of a complete amateur. Unfortunately, Geese still won easily, and he left quite the impression on the crowd. The tournament continues, and our heroes win all their fights. The last match of the first round is Kelvin's, and our heroes are eager to finally see what he can do. Kelvin attacks with incredible speed, and Rick says that it's like Kelvin knew exactly what his opponent was going to do. Bruston explains just how crazy Kelvin is, as Kelvin can sense changes in electrical signals and adrenaline, among other things, just by smelling them. They agree that Kelvin is an incredible fighter, but the crowd is shocked as Kelvin gets knocked to the ground. Then Rick is the one to be shocked, as the others explain that Kelvin let himself get hit. The crowd cheers for Kelvin, so he gets up and quickly knocks out his opponent. Kelvin is announced as the winner, but his friends think he plays around too much. The second round begins the next day, and Snape arrives to take a seat next to Rick. Snape introduces himself to the others, but Elisarette wonders why the lizard is putting on a nice guy act. Rick wonders why Snape isn't sitting in the VIP seats, so Snape explains that this next fight is incredibly important. It's a fight between his brother and his fiancée, so he needs to see it up close. In the halls, Geese thinks about how he drank too much the night before, and Geese runs into Angelica. Geese has been reminded about who she is, and Geese says that Snape told him not to damage her face, so she can look good at their wedding. Angelica is eager to show him the results of her hard work, but Geese mocks her, and says that no amount of training could make up for the gap in their power. Angelica is sure that he has trained hard as well because of his physique, but Geese says that he doesn't do any training. Geese lives his normal life, and his body ends up this way. Geese calls himself a naturally boring talent, and he recommends that Angelica just stands still during their fight. That way he can make sure that he doesn't punch her stomach, so she can still bear Snape's children. This of course infuriates Angelica, so Angelica vows to destroy him. Their match begins as the crowd goes crazy, but Angelica is stunned when her first attack does nothing to Geese. Angelica manages to dodge his attack, but once again her attack does nothing to Geese, despite landing a direct hit. Angelica knew she wouldn't be able to hurt Geese with her basic attacks, so she does something that surprises Snape all the way up in the stands. Angelica removed her strengthening magic, so Geese wondered what she was planning to do. Rionette cheers her on, and Angelica uses mana reflex inversion. Geese tells her to just give up, but Angelica uses her new thread slicer attack, and she manages to cut Geese. Everyone cheers her on, and Angelica wonders who Geese calls a small fry. Snape is stunned because not even the sharpest sword could scratch Geese's skin. Rick and Rionette know better, because this is what they taught Angelica. A look back we see when Rionette demonstrated the technique to Angelica. It is called Thread Slash, but Angelica thought that Rick was a psycho for wanting her to learn it. Rionette explained that it was not impossible, since Rick was able to learn it. Rick could never manage to be as precise as Rionette, so Rionette explained that Angelica just needed to feel the wind when she swung her arm. Angelica had a hard time grasping it, but Angelica practiced more than she ever had. Angelica eventually learned to incorporate her other abilities and reimagined the technique in her style. It is a technique that releases magical energy stored within the body in a short and powerful burst. It takes a huge toll on the body, but the hellish training they put her through makes it seem like nothing to her. Angelica's flicker feed ability allows her to use the technique in a way that only she is capable of. Geese gets annoyed when Angelica uses it again, and he nearly chops her in half. Snape is entertained as the two continue to battle it out, but Geese is done holding back. Geese sends Angelica flying into a wall and tells Snape that he can't resist doing whatever he wants to such a lively opponent. Angelica refuses to give up, but Geese has already seen Angelica's flicker ability a bunch of times, and he can now match her speed. Geese hits Angelica hard this time, and mocks her for being mediocre trash. Rick becomes concerned for Angelica, but Snape is glad that he is finally realizing that Geese's strength is unmeasurable. Snape first met his adopted brother when Geese was 8 years old, and Geese beat Snape so badly that he couldn't even stand. It turns out that Geese is the person that made Snape retire from fighting. Geese is a perfect prodigy, born with every talent needed for combat. Geese is a true monster. Geese is also a real jerk, because he continues to taunt Angelica. Geese says that Angelica is worthless trash and that will never change no matter how much training she does. Geese also insults Angelica's parents. Snape knows that Angelica thinks he is trying to rig the match and have Geese lose, but Geese is crazy strong and there is no need for that. Instead, Snape has done the opposite. The odds of a sponsor slot competitor winning are extremely low. Everyone bet against Geese, so Snape took those odds and placed a large bet on Geese to win. Then the crowd watches in horror as Geese begins to beat up Angelica. It's a cruel beating, and Rick determines that Angelica has reached her limit. Angelica is confident that Geese won't be able to beat her, but Geese is determined to see her break. Geese wants to make Angelica realize that a piece of trash will never be able to train enough to beat a prodigy like him. Angelica doesn't want to regret anything as she talked to Rick about, and she tries one last punch. This doesn't work out too well, as it just makes Geese eliminate Angelica even more. Rick tries to stop the match, but it's too late as Geese begins his final attack. Luckily for Angelica, something makes Geese miss. Angelica's life is spared and Geese is announced as the winner. Geese sees that Rick was the one who tossed his shoe, and Rick is furious. Angelica is taken away, and Rick meets with Geese in a hallway. Geese is pretty upset about the interference, but he is surprised when Rick avoids his attack. Rick calmly explains that there is no need to hurry, because he wants to defeat Geese in front of the entire crowd. Geese is furious, but he feels the same way. Rick goes on to win his next match, but Angelica is still in bad shape. Rick thinks about how hard Angelica trained, and he can't help but sympathize with her. Bruston defeats his opponent with just one strike as Rick did, and Kelvin shows off his immense power as well. This only leaves 4 competitors, and the semi-finals will take place the next day. Rick finishes up some training, and finds that Angelica has recovered. Rick assumes that Bruston healed her, but he warns that any damage deep in the body will remain. Something is very obviously bothering Angelica, but Rick doesn't even notice, so she explains what is wrong. Rick trained her even though there was nothing in it for him, but she ended up failing. Angelica apologizes for wasting his time, and explains that she just wanted to prove that she could walk on her own 2 feet. Angelica convinces herself that marrying Snape won't be so bad, but Rick snaps her out of it. Rick says that he is the one that should be apologizing, because he wasn't able to measure Geese's true strength before it was too late. Rick simply tells her to watch his next match closely, so Angelica can see what lies beyond the training she went through. The semifinals finally begin, and Rick is set to face Geese. Rick is surprised to hear that Geese wants to apologize to Angelica, but it turns out that Geese is only sorry that he didn't end her life. Now Angelica has to endure living while being tormented by her lack of ability. The fight begins, so Geese starts taunting Rick, but Rick ends up crushing his face. Rick has brought the prodigy to his knees, so Rick tells Geese to stop looking so pathetic. Geese thinks Rick is just getting too confident, but Rick rocks him again. Angelica is shocked to see Rick's attacks working on Geese's iron body, but Rick has hardly used his strength at all. Rick is only using controlled attacks. The force of the blow doesn't land on the outside of the body, it boards its way inside. It doesn't matter how strong Geese's body is, if Rick attacks with perfect timing, he will do major damage. Rick gives Geese a chance to quit, but Geese uses strengthening magic instead. It is specifically for dragons, and it makes the match much more intense. It uses up a lot of magical energy, but that is no problem for Geese. Snape explains that Geese has never trained his magical capacity at all. He was just born with a ton of it. Rick is practically the opposite, so Geese tells him to blame his parents. Rick's next attack gets stopped by Geese's iron body, and Angelica is shocked to see that Geese was able to learn the technique she was using. The crowd has gone quiet, so Geese assumes that everyone has gotten bored of watching a prodigy beat up an average person. However, Bruston sees it differently. Bruston explains that Rick doesn't care about the audience, he only cares about how Angelica sees him. Rick blocks another attack, and he is pleased to see that Geese is finally showing some signs of fatigue. Geese is shocked because no matter how much he attacks, Rick never sheds a drop of blood. This is because Rick is using a special technique. It allows Rick to disperse attacks within his body, so he has hardly taken any damage at all. Geese is insulted because Rick is holding back. Rick explains that he restricted his physical abilities to match Angelica's levels, because winning this match isn't the only important thing. Rick also wants to show Angelica her potential. Rick has turned this match into sort of a virtual rematch between Geese and Angelica. This of course infuriates Geese, but Rick tells him to calm down and think about his next attack. Geese turns his body into iron for his next attack, but Rick shatters his armor to pieces. Rick explains that Geese has never tried hard enough at anything, so getting this tired is new to him. Snape refuses to believe that Rick surpasses Geese's power, but Rick's member points out that Rick hardly has any ability at all. Rick started training after the time for training his magic reserves had passed, so technically, Rick is less than average. Snape can't understand how Rick can surpass a prodigy like Geese, but Angelica has come to realize why. Rick tells Geese that he isn't used to being tired, so Geese is no longer able to retain his precision while attacking. Those who work hard continue to push themselves even through fatigue. They keep moving until they can't anymore. The strength a person has after they have exhausted themselves is the person's true strength. Geese tries to keep attacking, but it's no use. Rick says that true prodigies hone their skills by putting in a lot of effort, and he has seen this happen with his friends. Geese has always thought he was the strongest person alive, but in reality, Geese was only running into opponents he could beat. Geese loses it after hearing this, so he uses the greatest of Dragonoid strengthening magic. This practically turns Geese into a dragon, and Snape reveals that Geese has called on the ancient blood of the dragons. Rick is cut off guard by his power, and he is shocked when his next punch does nothing to the Geese. It's like Geese is made of metal, and his attacks are a lot faster. Geese lucked up being born with this powerful body, so Rick determined that he wouldn't be able to win. Geese is glad that Rick has come to his senses, but what Rick meant was that someone at Angelica's current level can't beat a dragon. This doesn't mean that Angelica should give up, because she just needs to keep training for the next time, and needs to put her life on the line. Then Rick starts adding a few months of training here and there, slowly increasing his power. Rick releases 12 months worth of training, and he becomes too fast to see. Angelica says that she isn't at this level yet, but she can see that Rick is using her flickering feet technique in an advanced way. This makes Angelica realize that this will be her strength if she continues the hellish training for another year. Rick has taken control of the fight, so he does some more lecturing. Rick explains that ordinary hard work can't overcome the difference in inborn abilities. It requires the madness to continue to exert extraordinary efforts. Angelica indeed lost after training herself to death for an entire month, so Rick questions if Angelica will be able to push herself to do that same hellish training for an entire year, if it means she can win. Angelica reminds herself about what Rick said about the regret scale. Angelica is inspired and declares that she was born with a scale that only ever tips in one direction. Rick knocks Geese on his back, and Rick wonders if Geese has what it takes to push himself through this current struggle. Unfortunately, Geese hasn't learned a single thing, so Rick decides that he will just have to end the fight. Rick uses the thread slash, but he isn't as precise as Angelica. The attack still manages to defeat Geese, but Rick tells him that Geese is lucky that he isn't facing the Angelica that will exist in a year. Angelica is confident that she can reach the level Rick showed her in 1 year, and Rick is declared the winner of this match. Snape is surprisingly calm, and it is because he is actually happy to see Geese lost. Geese destroyed Snape's life as a fighter, so Snape doesn't feel bad for him at all. Snape has lost a lot of money after betting on Geese, and he won't be able to marry Angelica now. Angelica mocks him for it, but she is surprised when Snape accepts defeat. It's finally time for the second match of the tournament. That'll have Brufston face Keldon. Keldon is a 3-time champion, but Brufston beats every opponent he fought with just one punch. Keldon can instantly tell how much of a beast Brufston is, because he is just standing there, but he still doesn't leave a single opening. The fight begins, so Keldon starts with the barrage of punches, but the crowd is amazed when Brufston pushes Keldon back. Keldon becomes excited because Brufston is the strongest person he has ever faced, but everyone is horrified when Geese returns to the arena. Geese's dragon blood has made him go crazy, so he goes on a rampage in the stands. The terrifying Geese goes to attack Keldon, but Keldon easily stops him and sends him flying. Geese's strength is at the level of an A rank, but Keldon destroyed him so easily This makes Rick's group wonder if he has stepped into the realm of S-rank. Kelvin is disappointed to hear that his match is being postponed to the next day, but Bruston says that he sensed uncertainty in his attacks. Later everyone goes to eat, and they discuss how they just need Bruston or Rick to win, and they will get the jewel thereafter. Rick isn't there because he went on his 700 kilometers run, and Angelica isn't even surprised by his craziness anymore. Rick gets pretty far from the city, and he finds Kelvin training. Rick thinks that Kelvin should be more concerned about exhausting himself before his fight against Bruston, but Kelvin doesn't care. Instead, Kelvin wants to spar against Rick. Rick has no choice but to spar, and he shocks Kelvin with his incredible speed. Rick is impressed to see Kelvin dodge his punch, so Rick wonders why Kelvin got hit one time during the tournament. Rick knows that Kelvin uses his strong sense of smell during fights, so Rick wonders if his nose is just stuffy. Kelvin acknowledges Rick's strength, so he decides to tell him his backstory. Kelvin grew up always looking forward to his next fight, but eventually there wasn't anything he could call a fight anymore. Things got better when he came to Heractopia, but Kelvin eventually started beating everyone there too. Kelvin was knocking people out in under 1 minute, and with just one punch. Kelvin became upset because things started getting boring again, but he thought it wouldn't be so bad, because at least Gym Leader was happy. The fights became meaningless, so getting stronger was the only thing Kelvin had to look forward to. One day some guy told the gym leader that people were starting to get bored of the tournament, because Kelvin just kept winning with one punch. This guy warned that gym leader's gym would fail if people stopped caring about fighting, so he wanted Kelvin to start losing on purpose. Gym leader couldn't have cared less about what this guy wanted, and there was no way he would ever tell Kelvin to lose a fight. Kelvin did not want to cause problems for the guy who was already missing an eye, so he threw a fight so everyone would think that he was beatable. From then on, Kelvin mixed some bad fighting days with good ones. Kelvin made it so the crowd would love watching the fights, and he still won 3 times in a row. Now Kelvin fights so that matches are exciting, and he never fights seriously. Kelvin's fights draw huge crowds to the city, and his coach Jim prospers. Rick seemingly wasn't even listening, and he just warned Kelvin not to take Bruston lightly. The next day the fight is set to take place, and the audience is told that defense magic has been cast over the seating area. The fight starts the same way it did before, but this time Kelvin uses a new move. Everyone is shocked because Kelvin rotated his arm at high speed to increase the force of his blow. It was enough to knock Bruston's hand out of the way, but Bruston nearly eliminates Kelvin with his counterattack. Kelvin is impressed, but Bruston can't say the same. Bruston can tell that Kelvin isn't fighting seriously, but Kelvin wonders if Rick has told him the truth. Bruston is just making assumptions, but Kelvin admits that he holds back for the sake of the audience. Kelvin acknowledges that Bruston is the real deal, but he still can't fight seriously. If Kelvin does, then everyone will realize that he has been holding back and throwing fights. Kelvin is ashamed, but Bruston commends him for putting others before himself. Bruston is disappointed about not being able to fight Kelvin at full strength, but it can't be helped. So Bruston prepares to use the appropriate amount of strength for this situation. Bruston says that he will only fight with 2 fingers, and he won't move a single inch from the spot he is standing in. It would be hypocritical for Kelvin to tell him to fight seriously, so he just accepts the challenge. Bruston tosses him around a bit with just his 2 fingers, and Kelvin realizes that he is also making the fight interesting. Everyone cheers for Kelvin, but Mizik can tell that Bruston is doing something clever. Kelvin thinks about how much fun it would be to fight someone like Bruston at full strength, especially because there are a lot of attacks he wants to test out. Unfortunately, Kelvin just won't let himself ruin everything. Just then Gym Leader yells at him, and reveals that he sees right through Kelvin. Gym Leader knows that Kelvin has been holding back, but he says that it has always been his dream to train up the strongest fighter in history. The Gym Leader wants Kelvin to become the strongest, but Kelvin wonders if it's okay. The old man would like nothing more, so Kelvin decides to fight to his heart's content. Kelvin has never been more excited, and he tells Bruston that there is no need to act anymore. Everyone is shocked when Bruston stops Kelvin's all-out attack, but Kelvin points out that Bruston had to use all 5 fingers to stop him. Kelvin wonders if it was an accident, but Bruston explains that he is just using the appropriate amount of strength. Bruston keeps blocking all of Kelvin's attacks, but Kelvin sees an opening. Kelvin just ends up getting tossed, but he irons up his body to avoid the impact. The 2 fighters are having a great time, but the crowd has begun to realize that Kelvin has been tricking them this entire time. There is no going back now, so Keldon is determined to take this fight all the way. Keldon uses level 5 nature-composed magic, but Angelica points out that dog people like him are not supposed to be good with magic. This means that Keldon must have trained himself to his limits several times. Rick is incredibly impressed, and he determines that Keldon must be on the same level as Bruston. Everyone is shocked, and the gym leader thinks about how he didn't even know Keldon could use magic. Bruston blocks the attack, but Keldon closes the gap and prepares another spell. Keldon dodges Bruston's attack, and he manages to trap Bruston. Angelica expected no less from a champion, but Rick is worried about something. Keldon prepares his next spell, but Bruston's group don't seem to be worried. The same can't be said for the crowd, as they are shocked when Keldon prepares to use level 8 magic. Keldon creates a giant ball of energy, and Rick is horrified to see how bad things are getting. Angelica has never seen Rick like this, and Rick just says that Keldon is far stronger than he imagined. What's most terrifying is that this means Bruston will stop holding back. Bruston breaks free from the trap and determines that Keldon should be able to take the attack he is about to use. Keldon's giant ball of energy is just getting bigger, but the entire crowd is shocked when Bruston just uses brute strength to stop the attack. Bruston acknowledges Keldon's new will to fight, and everyone is shocked when he gives a quarter thumbs up. It is a tradition in orc battles, and it means that both fighters will abandon evasions and defense to simply exchange blows. Rick is horrified to hear this, because it means that Bruston will just be attacking for the rest of the fight. Keldon feels something he has never felt before, and he wonders if this feeling is the thing called terror. Bruston is so fast that Keldon's senses of smell are useless against him, and he gets thrown back from just a shock wave of Bruston's punch. Keldon uses different types of level 7 magic, but it is no use. Bruston just keeps moving forward, and he isn't even blinking. Everyone is sure that Keldon is out of energy after using so many spells, and Bruston lands a punch. Angelica thinks it was a direct hit, but Rick explains that it wasn't. Keldon used several moves to avoid getting destroyed. Keldon's bones and organs are still messed up pretty badly, but any other person would have been destroyed. Keldon considers giving up for a moment, but he has always wished for an opponent like Bruston. This is the fight Keldon has been looking for his entire life, so he angrily tells himself to get up. Keldon is all out of magic, but he refuses to give up, so Keldon declares that he still has his physical strength. Keldon unleashes a flurry of punches, but Rick knows that he won't last long after taking so much damage. Keldon eventually collapses, and he is surprised to learn that guys as strong as Bruston really do exist. Just then, everyone begins to cheer for Keldon. Keldon is touched to hear them cheering, even after he deceived them for so long, so he stands up once more. The audience goes crazy, and Keldon prepares to throw one final punch. Keldon is out of magic and strength, but he says that this is the time to use his spirit for fuel. Keldon is covered in flames as he combines several techniques and unleashes his attack. Everyone watches, absolutely amazed by the grand display of power, but this incredible attack does nothing to Bruston. Bruston commends him for the impressive attack, and wonders if Keldon has used every last drop of energy he had. Keldon can only laugh, as he realizes that he couldn't even move Bruston, but Keldon says that this fight was the most fun he has ever had in his entire life. Keldon has earned Bruston's respect, and he shows it by punching him right in the face. The gym leader acknowledges that Keldon has lost, but he still considers him to be the greatest fighter in history. Keldon collapses as he is out for the count, but the joy this fight brings him makes him smile. Bruston's friends cheer for his victory, and Rick congratulates him on defeating the champion. Angelica thinks that such an overwhelming victory against the champion is incredible, but Bruston says that Keldon was very impressive. Rick is glad that they will for sure get the jewel now, and all he will have to do is withdraw. Bruston interrupts Rick, and just says that he is looking forward to their match. Rick realizes that he is in great danger, and loses a bunch of hair from the overwhelming stress. Elsewhere, Keldon reads articles about his loss, and how he had been deceiving everyone. Keldon feels like he has become the villain, but Gym Leader is sure that everything will be fine. Gym Leader is more interested in Keldon's final move, because he never knew Keldon had such a powerful attack in his arsenal. Keldon explains that the move just came to him, because he was so absorbed in the moment. Keldon feels guilty about lying to everyone, and even worse about losing. Gym Leader knows that he was just being considerate, and reminds him that losing isn't a big deal, because he can just train hard and get stronger again. Kelvin wonders why he looks after him so much, so the gym leader explains that he is like a son to him. Bruston interrupts and offers to treat Kelvin's wounds. Kelvin rejects the offer because Kelvin wants to feel pain that he hasn't felt in a while. Kelvin also realizes that Rick was right for warning him about how strong Bruston is. Rick isn't doing so great, as he has locked himself in his room. Angelica tells him to stop acting like a child, but Rick doesn't want to die again. Snape came to give some encouragement, but now Snape tries to convince Rick to come out of hiding. Snape explains that everyone is excited to watch the finals, because this is the first time in a while that they will have a new champion. Snape would like for Rick to participate, but Rick says that his life is more important than some tournament. Snape changes his strategy and dramatically explains that a lot of people are counting on him to make the tournament a success. Tons of money has been waged as well. Snape says that it can't be helped if Rick doesn't want to risk his life, and he determines that everyone else will just have to abandon their dreams. Angelica reminds Rick that he can just be revived, so dying shouldn't be a big deal. That is easy for Angelica to say, but Rick says that dying is scary. Angelica reminds him that he endured years of training with Bruston, so he shouldn't be scared of fighting just one match against him. Rick says that training and fighting are completely different, and Angelica just wouldn't understand. Angelica is hurt by these words, and Angelica realizes that she has been wrong about Rick all along. Just then Mizet wonders if Rick ever thought about how strange it was that Bruston had a perfect training plan prepared on the first day he arrived. Rick thought that they were just ready to train any allies they encountered, so they could defeat Kaiser Elsapiat. This wasn't the only reason, as Mizet reveals that Bruston was always waiting to train up someone he could fight on equal ground. Orc has a culture of fighting, but Bruston is so strong that he has never once had an even fist fight. Bruston has felt alone since childhood, so it is his dream to one day fight on equal ground with someone. Mizet is sure that Bruston was hoping that his fight with Rick would fulfill his dream, so he wants Rick to consider that. Alyssarette also expresses her feelings, and Rick gives it some thought. Rick has a memory of when he first met Bruston, and he was terrified, just from their handshake. Bruston could tell that didn't have any fighting experience, and he had the lowest magic capacity. Rick thought that Bruston was just the same as all the people who denounced his dream, and he assumed that he would tell him to give up on becoming an adventurer. Rick was shocked because this was not the case, and Bruston just told him that he would have to train hundreds of times harder than someone with talent. Rick couldn't believe that he was accepting him, and Bruston just wondered if he was ready to endure that kind of training. Angelica is furious about Rick's behavior, and she wonders if Bruston's training was really that terrifying. Mizet explains that it was hell on earth, and he is surprised that Rick didn't go crazy during it. How Rick managed to last for over 2 years is a complete mystery. Angelica's in disbelief, because Rick has no skill, but he decided to put himself through grueling training at the age of 40. The others reveal that Rick has an inborn skill, but the activation requirement is tricky. Its strength can't be controlled, and it takes a huge toll on Rick's body. Because of this, Bruston forbade the use of it. Back at the inn, Rick wonders if he is pathetic. Rionette doesn't think so, but Rionette says that she would like Rick even more if he fought for Bruston's sake. The day of the final match finally arrives, and Snape is more nervous than anyone because he fears that Rick will withdraw right before the fight. Rick is waiting nearby, and Rick explains that he is over his fear. Rick has determined that all he has to do is throw everything he has learned from Bruston. Rick tries to act super confident, but it's obvious that he is still terrified. In the arena, the announcer reveals the long list of rewards for the winner. Rick is still terrified, so Rionette whispers something into his ear. Both fighters take the field, and Rick declares that he will be giving everything he has. Bruston looks forward to it, and instructs Rick to take everything he has taught him and send it right back to him. No one has any clue about who might win, because they are both so powerful, and the match begins. Rick starts by using the flickering feet technique, but it is way faster than Angelica has ever seen. Rick eventually stops, and Bruston is very impressed, because Rick managed to make him bleed. Snape wonders what kind of magic is being used, but Angelica reveals that they haven't used any magic at all. Their movements are way too fast for Snape to see, so the others explain that Bruston blocked several blows, but Rick managed to hurt him using a thread slash. The fight continues as Rick applies some pressure, but Bruston pushes him back. Rick just barely manages to dodge a devastating attack, and he lands another thread slash. Angelica is amazed by this level of fighting, so she wonders what AnimeT told Rick. AnimeT reveals that she asked Rick to take her on the hot springs trip that the winner of the tournament gets. Angelica is horrified when she assumes that the two of them will be getting intimate, and AnimeT makes it worse by not denying it. Bruston is glad to see that Rick has come to fight, and decides that it would be rude for him to do nothing but defend. Bruston unleashes a horrifyingly powerful punch, and it causes mass panic. Keldon is in disbelief, because Bruston's one punch has more power than level 5 nature-composed magic. Rick knows that he won't survive if he just runs in carelessly, and he dodges for his life as Bruston unleashes a barrage of punches. Rick realizes that it is just a distraction, and Angelica becomes worried about him. AnimeT isn't concerned, and we see that Rick dodged the attack. Everyone is stunned, because Rick used a simple level 1 magic technique to block Bruston's insanely powerful attack. What Keldon is most impressed by is that Rick activated it without pausing to gather his magic. Bruston compliments Rick for his precise magic control, because even he can't perform magic without saying the magic's name first. Rick credits Elisarette and Mizet for teaching him, but they say that it is all because Rick trained really hard. Rick uses incredible speed to land another attack, but it doesn't do much, and Bruston counterattacks. Everyone thinks Rick is crazy for directly attacking Bruston from the front, and Rick ends up in the air where he is most vulnerable. Bruston goes to finish the fight, but Rick amazingly uses the same level 1 magic spell to cast an air cushion beneath his feet, so he can change direction. Rick follows up with the powerful air attack of his own, but Bruston is unharmed. Angelica is amazed at their power, because their strength exceeds human understanding. They belong in the realm of monsters, and it is clear that this is a battle between two S ranks. Rick can't believe that his airstrike didn't do anything, and he determines that he has to use it at a closer range. Bruston is pleased to see that his training on Rick worked out perfectly, but it was only possible because of Rick's mental and emotional strength. Rick couldn't be happier to hear these words, but they are still the words that a teacher gives to a student. Bruston's dream is to fight someone on equal ground, so Rick determines that he hasn't done enough. Rick reveals that the others told him about Bruston's dream, so the embarrassed Bruston says that they exaggerated. Rick doesn't believe him, because he saw firsthand the passion Bruston had when training him. Rick wants to repay Bruston for all his efforts, and Rick declares that he will also fight him with respect. Bruston realizes how fortunate he is, because Rick has truly become a member of their party. Bruston decides that this is the perfect time to talk about the past, specifically about how the Orichalcum Fist came to be. A look back to 46 years ago, we see when Bruston was just 5 years old. This was when Bruston realized that he was different from all the other orcs in his pack. Aside from his appearance, Bruston was much more intelligent than the others. Bruston began reading books left behind by humans, but orcs normally communicate by fighting. Unfortunately, Bruston was too strong, so he could never relate to his kind. Bruston decided to improve the lives of the orcs, so he taught them how to make a fire and how to communicate in other ways. Eventually, Bruston was worshipped as a god, and there was no longer anyone who would even attempt to approach him. This included his own family, so Bruston was all alone. One day Bruston returned from some scavenging, to find that all the orcs lost their lives in a flood. However, Bruston felt nothing, which was just another painful reminder of how isolated he was. One night Bruston was attacked by a human, but this human was shocked to see that an orc was reading and talking. On top of that, Bruston had eliminated a wyvern that was tormenting a town. This man was hired to kill an orc in the forest, but it is clear that Bruston is no ordinary orc. The two talked about Bruston's situation and how isolated he has become. Bruston wanted a friend that he could fight on equal terms, but he didn't believe that he would ever find one. The man was Reinhard, and he had dreams as well, so Reinhard urged Bruston to chase their dreams together. Reinhard explained that he fought alongside the hero Yamato, and he became known as one of the legendary 5. Reinhard was also the man that wrote the book about Yamato's legendary journey. Reinhard said that he wanted to defeat Kaiser Alsapiet, and he knew how audacious that dream was. Reinhard thought that Bruston was much closer to achieving his dream than he thought, so Bruston agreed to journey with him. This was when Bruston became an adventurer, and the pair founded the Orichalcum Fist. Just like Reinhard said would happen, people with power equal to Bruston's assembled. They all had their own unique skills, but what Bruston wanted was a fistfight, like what happens between orcs. This was when Bruston came up with his training plan, but Mizet doubted that there was any person on the planet that would be able to survive it. After a while, Bruston nearly gave up on his dream, but eventually Rick showed up. Back to the present, Bruston is ready to fight. Rick thinks about how Bruston was alongside him throughout all his training, but Rick never realized how much time Bruston was devoted to him. Rick thinks about the skills he can use, but he doesn't feel right fighting Bruston this way, because Bruston is looking for a straight-up fistfight. Rick remembers being taught about the orc's quarter thumbs up, which is a sign that two fighters will abandon the thought of running away so they can solely trade blows. Then everyone is shocked. When Rick shows this quarter thumbs up to Bruston, Rick apologizes to AnimeT, because Rick knows that this means he won't be able to take her on the hot springs trip. AnimeT is happy, because Rick's selflessness is why she loves him. Bruston reciprocates Rick's gesture, so the two start to fight it out. The sheer force of their punches causes massive damage that can be felt throughout the entire arena. As they beat the pop out of each other, Rick realizes that it is thanks to Bruston that he has been able to chase his dream, so Rick has to repay Bruston. Mizet can tell that things are going to get even more dangerous, so he asks Kitaerarete to lend him some magic. Kitaerarete does as Mizet begins an incantation, and Mizet teleports the entire audience away to safety. Kelvin wonders why Mizet did it, so Mizet explains that Rick and Bruston's fight is going to cause an amount of damage. Everyone is outside, but they have no clue what just happened. Rick and Bruston continue to fight with each other, and everyone has to brace themselves. Their analysis determines that Rick has landed more punches, but Bruston is several levels above him in terms of power per punch. The two warriors exchange some serious blows, but Rick takes the most of the damage. Rick can barely stand up, but Rick refuses to give up because he hasn't paid Bruston back yet. The battle continues as they bash each other's faces in, and Bruston laughs for the first time. Eventually Rick gets smashed, as Bruston sends him right through the arena walls, and Rick questions if this is as far as he can go. Rick is exhausted, so Rick convinces himself that the fight he put up was good enough for someone like him. Rick hopes that Bruston is satisfied with the fight, but Rick sees that his sensei looks like it can still fight more. Rick's body can no longer move, so he can't continue fighting, but Rick is surprised when he can at least move a finger. Angelica assumes that Rick can't continue, but the others reveal that Rick is not done yet. That isn't all, as they explain that Rick hasn't even gotten really serious yet. Rick determines that he isn't good enough to be called Bruston's equal, especially since this was just a simple fistfight for him. However, Rick can't let himself rest, as this fight hasn't been nearly enough to repay Bruston for everything he has done for him. Rick unleashes an incredible amount of power, and AnimeT explains that Rick is using his inherent skill, called Reckless Soul. Power surges through Rick's body, and everyone celebrates because their goal to shock Bruston is complete. It turns out that they wanted to surprise Bruston by helping him achieve his dream of fighting an equal opponent. To do this, they gave Rick special training and kept it a secret from Bruston. They were able to help Rick learn how to control his inherent skill and how to use it at will. The condition to activate Reckless Soul is to be ready to exceed his limits in order to battle someone far stronger than himself. What Rick needs to activate it is not magical power or physical strength. It is the strength of will. Incredible amounts of power continue to surge from Rick's body, and AnimeT declares that the real fight begins now. The powered-up Rick battles it out once again, and everyone watching becomes worried. Bruston is amazed by everyone's surprise, and Bruston realizes that while he was super focused on his goal, he didn't notice how much everyone cares about him. Bruston finally acknowledges that he has friends now, and he hasn't been alone for a long time. The two warriors continue their battle, and Bruston finally experiences what it's like to be pushed to exhaustion. The others can tell that they have both surpassed their limits, and the next hit will decide everything. The two guys charge at each other, and they both land their final punch. No one can tell who won, and they find that both of them are still standing up somehow. Rick can barely speak, but he acknowledges how incredible Bruston is. Rick explains that even after everything he has done, he still wasn't able to beat Bruston. Rick collapses, but Bruston has no clue what Rick is talking about. Bruston explains that they only got to this point because Rick chose to humor Bruston's dream and gave him a fistfight. Bruston declares that victory belongs to Rick, and he collapses as well. Afterwards, Rick wakes up after sleeping for 3 whole days. Rick can't understand why he was given the championship belt, so Bruston explains that it is because Rick won the fight. Rick is grateful, but Rick knows that he wouldn't have been able to defeat Bruston if he used his healing ability on himself over and over again. Bruston doesn't want Rick to be down on himself, so Bruston tells Rick that he is incredibly strong. Bruston acknowledges the others as well, and thanks them for being his friends. The group finally has the second of the 6 jewels, so they are one step closer to Yamato and Kaiser Alsapiet. They also have a fake replacement jewel to put in the belt. Just then Rick wonders how old Reinhardt is, because he fought alongside Yamato, but that was over 200 years ago. Reinhardt's exact age is unknown, but his inherent skill is what has extended his life. Reinhardt has been gone for a while, but it is only because the deadline for his book was closing in and he is on the run. That night Snape explains that Rick and Bruston both declined the victory. The tournament can't be left without a winner, so Kelvin is now champion again. Kelvin can't accept this decision, so Snape asks him to at least watch over the belt. Our group prepares to go home, but everyone scolds Rick for trying to bring back too much food. Bruston thinks about Reinhardt and hopes that he can tell him that his dream has finally come true. Angelica says goodbye as well, but Rick is shocked to hear that she will be back because Bruston promised to train her. Rick can't believe that Angelica is willing to sacrifice her life, but Angelica is determined to catch up to Rick and even surpass him. Rick says that he plans to run home because he is a late starting E-rank adventurer, but Angelica points out that Rick is pretty much an S-rank. Angelica assumes that Rick will be running his typical 500 kilometers, but she is shocked when Rick says that their house is actually 2,800 kilometers away. Angelica fears that their food will rot in the carriage during the long trip, but Mizet uses enhancement magic to buff up their horse. Rick is ready to go, but Rionette first wants to know when they will be going on their hot spring trip. Bruston reminds him that he did actually win the tournament, and Rick imagines what the trip would be like. Rick says that he didn't win, and Mizet agrees that it was a draw. Mizet recommends that they have a race back home, and if Rick loses then he will have to go on the hot spring trip. On top of that, Rick will have to do 100 times the training. The race begins, but Rick stays behind to promise Rionette that he will take her to the hot spring one day. Rick doesn't want to have to do 100 times of training, so he begins running. As they run back, Rick thinks about how even though it took a really long time, his dream of becoming an adventurer finally came true. This isn't the end, however, as his next dream still awaits him, and it doesn't matter how old he is. So friends, if you liked our recap video, then please like and share this video and do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching.